Good morning, everybody. I make it 10 o'clock, so we'll get underway. I've just got a few things I need to say, first of all. Firstly, and mainly, I think, on documents, just so that you all keep a check on what's been put in and the numbering. I've got four from yesterday. There was the additional list concerning consultation with the resumption of the inquiry, which the council put in. That's document number 8. Councillor Stern's statement from Bramley, I've got down as number 9. And then there were 2 documents from Mr. Cottle. Attorney put in details of the caravan count, a 1-page schedule, and then there was a judgment from the Court of Appeal, the case of Rex versus the Secretary of State, which I've got down as number 11. Have I missed anything, or is that consistent with what you?
No, that's all good, and thank you very much for the numbering for those. We have produced the suggested walk route for the
right.
for the site view, so I'll just ask that to be passed round.
Yes.
And if that could be ID 12. And we've also printed out the conditions list for Mr. Woods, and perhaps just so that's easily found, we could call that ID 13. So we could, Chris, would you mind?
Yes, if you circulate those to the other
just
parties,
2 of those.
Mr. Lintott.
Thank you.
In terms of the route for site visits, is there a copy that the parish councils can see as well? Because they may well have suggestions.
There is, yeah. We've made 8 copies, so.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Wardian. Good. That deals with 2 other points that I was going to come to. So thank you for that. And then I think the other point concerning documents from yesterday was Mr. Masters. There was the question of the redaction of the additional personal information. I know I didn't expect it to be done for this morning, but I'm just mentioning it as to make sure I don't forget about it. That's fine. It's fine. That's all I need. Waiting for my person instructing me to come and go through that. Yes. No, I'll just mention it every day till I know it's done. In that context, we have some new evidence relating to Matthew Doherty on site D. Well, if you remember at the beginning of yesterday, I made a point of asking the parties if there were any additional documents, and generally the answer was no. So unless it's something that's happened very recently, why is it coming in now? So it is. It relates to a recent diagnosis of muscular dystrophy. And was the document not known about when the inquiry opened? Because if it was, it should have been put in response to my. Well, you should have made us aware of it then. That's my concern, because I didn't have a document because it was going to be produced today. I was during it wasn't here yesterday. Well, I was aware of it. I could have mentioned it yesterday, and it slipped me under the I fully intended to, when he was here today, to ask him to go in, but I didn't think because it's a recent diagnosis going to be an issue. Except we've got the same problem, which is that it's not been active. But actually, I said already on air, actually, what it is to, but well, the document itself will be redacted, won't it? It will do initially. I was going to show it to you, then take it back and get it back. Well, why not deal with a redacted version and give me the full one then? Yes.
Inspector, if it helps, I mean, obviously, we're of the view that you should have whatever information is necessary in front of you. It's unfortunate, but it's understandable given how things panned out yesterday. It didn't come in yesterday. So I agree,
but I just want to make a point that I don't want this a steady drip of documents. I mean, that's the whole reason for asking if there is anything additional at the beginning of the inquiry.
I can only apologise.
It's okay, Mr. Masters. Let's get on with it and sort it out.
Would you like a non-redacted
I will need a non-redacted version just to be consistent with everything else I've got.
Yeah.
But if you need to get that one, if you need that one to get the redaction sorted out, deal with that first and then put it in when you're ready.
I'm great. I wanted to indicate I had it.
Yes.
And then treat it the same way as the others. So
Yes, okay.
redacted, non-redacted copy in due course.
Yes.
Great.
Okay, well, we've dealt with that on the personal information side. I'm afraid I'm going to come back to plans. I thought we'd sorted this yesterday, but I was double checking the plans again, Mr. Cottle, and I just had a query which I think I know the answer, but I just want to ask you because it's about Site B, and I realised that there are two different day rooms, I think, on Site B. One of them, on the copy I've got anyway, you can see I've got the plans and elevations here. It's marked draft. So it's just a question of the status of the drawing. This one's marked draft. I just want to check whether it's the plan that you're seeking approval for.
Well, I'd like to come back on that after I've just.
Of course, yeah. Do you want the drawing number, Mr. Cottle?
Indeed, thank you.
It's BS 412 A100, and I think I'm just opening up to make sure. It's the rectangular day room. I think there are two of those, and there's one that's L-shaped. So I just need clarity on that, please. I think that's my remit. I think that's all. Then we are sorted on Site B.
I had one point to add, which is that
Go on.
yesterday we broached the subject of officers' reports, and I had in mind the list in Mr. Ward's, I think it's CW 15, of all the decision notices for the various permissions on Lydia Park. And you were asking me, are the officers' reports before me?
I think you said they were.
I do, but I looked for them last night and I've got them all here. But I couldn't find their reference, and I know that they were referred to by the appellants in the statement of case, but only extracts were taken from.
But you say you've got them, but have you got them yourself? Or
I've got them, yes. But
have I got them?
No, that's the point.
Well,
I was researching it. I was researching it last night. I confess that I don't think they are before.
No.
There is a relevance because, of course, the conditions are already before you in the CW 15 from Mr. Ward, because they've got the decision notices for each of those decisions. But part of the appellant's case is that those sites, some of them in fact are on higher ground, as we know from the flooding LiDAR data, weren't regarded as being in the setting of the AONB in the officers' reports.
Which I haven't seen.
That's right.
Yes. So are you simply correcting the position from yesterday, or are you suggesting I need more documents again?
I'm correcting the position from yesterday first and foremost, but there is a point which may be agreed with my learned friend, that none of the reports make that point.
Well, I'm not going to agree anything without going through the documentation that my learned friend relies upon to suggest that. I mean, obviously we've got a 60-page document in CW 15, which is numbered and relates to appeal decisions and decision notices, so it's clear what it contains. But if there's additional documents, I mean, I haven't read every single document that Waverley has ever produced, so I'll need to look at a document and agree it based upon that.
So it strikes me, sorry, Stephen.
Just perhaps I can make them available to my learned friend and then he can consider the point.
Yes.
Because it doesn't, it's a bad point for Waverley to take if it's not evidenced in the officers' reports.
So I was just going to support Mr. Cottle. It's always been the case that there's an inconsistency of approach by the way that the council have approved planning permissions for the main areas of Lydia Park, which is in the same area. And some of the objections I'm now taking, particularly on landscaping. And I must confess, I thought, because I'd read the same reference, that they were there. So when Mr. Cottle said they were there yesterday, I truly expected that they were.
Right. Well, I think I'll need to be persuaded that these documents would really need to come in. There's already substantial material in relation to this appeal. And I mean, you mentioned by way of example, landscaping. Don't forget that in particular, with regard to what we're going to be discussing shortly, the point was made yesterday, and I agreed the flexibility was appropriate in relation to it, that the sites are different, the appeals are different. Although they may be close together, the context is not exactly the same for each one. So you can't necessarily read across by simply putting in officers' reports from another site and with the suggestion that they necessarily apply to sites further north.
Well, no, sir. I mean, because I represent Appeal 8, Thomas Doherty, which is
A, C, and D.
Yeah, which is right next door to Lydia Park.
Oh. Yes, it's on the north side of the access road.
Yeah. Well,
But I don't want to go any further. I mean, have the discussion, make Mr. Lintott aware of what you're mentioning, and we come back if needs be.
I mean, what I foresee happening, Inspector, just to be absolutely clear, is that my learned friend will produce a document that isn't in the evidence,
yes,
that nobody's seen, in cross-examination of Mr. Dudley, and he will say, aha, this decision notice, let's say 2020-1866, is predicated upon an officer's report, and in that report, the officer hasn't considered whether it's in the AGLV or hasn't considered whether it's, does that, that means you're wrong, and in your evidence, where you say it is in such a location or it is having that effect, you're mistaken. And of course, Mr. Dudley can't be assumed to have looked at documents that aren't in the evidence either.
There's been ample opportunity for these
if that is what
considered.
Mr. Cottle is suggesting he's minded to do in respect of the next witness to be called and cross-examined, then there's obvious prejudice in that. If there's documents he wants to rely upon that he's not produced in his rebuttal evidence or supplemental evidence before this inquiry that's not in the bundle, then I'll need to see that evidence, and I'll need to go through it with the witness before cross-examination takes place. So I'm not suggesting that is what will definitely happen, but I can see that might be where he's going. So I just raised that note.
Just looking at it from a different angle, there was a proof served, and then there was a series of rebuttals, and then there were various addendums or supplementary statements. And I believe, I stand to be corrected, but in the last one from Mr. Dudley, there were photographs taken by somebody else looking back on the site. And when you look back on the site, I was going to ask where the photograph was taken from. I don't know, but we've got suggested viewing points which might correlate with where the photographs were taken from. When you look back on the site from up there, struggling as you will to see it, all that you will see is the established permitted park behind, and it is relevant from that viewpoint that the sites on higher ground behind the appeal sites are not seen as being in the setting of the A and B.
Well, presumably this will all be the subject of the discussion that we're going to have. Yeah.
So
I don't see the need to have a protracted discussion about it now, Mr. Cottle.
Fair enough, but I do say that the officers' reports are more relevant because of the supplementary statement and the further evidence that we've had. I mean, the landscape hasn't changed. It could have gone in with the appeal statement or the proof, but it's come in the supplementary addendum statement regarding views from Huscombe Hill.
My recollection is that when I agreed to supplementary evidence because of the length of time taken by the adjournment, in the message that went out from the office, there was the opportunity, if new matters had arisen, as you suggest, for rebuttals to come in to that supplementary statement in advance of the inquiry opening. Now, that opportunity doesn't seem to have been taken in respect of what you're talking about.
Well,
So I'm very reluctant to accept substantial new paperwork at this stage.
I would just point out that the purpose of this supplementary addendum was not to introduce evidence regarding the landscape, which hadn't changed, which was always the same. Could have been led with the appeal statement of case.
Well, have the discussion and come back if you need to.
I mean, it's the winter views point, Inspector, so that's why it was said that something was different.
Yes.
But as you indicated, there was a procedure in place for dealing with that. And obviously, I'll talk with my learned friend. He's not raised the point yet, and so I don't know exactly
No.
what it entails. So I'll talk with him outside of the inquiry rather than take up any more time.
Let me come back to my final point, hopefully my final point on plans. And it's site C and D. So it's yours, Mr. Masters. And we've agreed that the revised location plans, which Mr. Rowe put in, people are happy with those, that identify the site in the right location. But when I was double checking yesterday evening, having thought we'd reached agreement on the plans, and I think I'm right, but I'm not. I'd like you to check. We've got essentially the same plans as a site plan for both C and D. I don't think it's showing the site in the same place as on the location plan. If you run a rule through to the land below Tunlidge Park, I think it's showing it's I think it should be showing the site further to the northeast. And the plan I'm looking at, it doesn't have a reference number, but it's the one that shows existing sites in the yellow and pink colour below the access track.
So all I
I- Can I just tell you what's the way I've looked at it? If you look at Lidger Park, and there's I'm looking at the composite, which has been agreed to be accurate. It's showing sites A through to D, and if you run a rule through that on the west side of C and D, that more or less ties up with where land below turns a corner, quite a distinctive feature on Lidger Park. If you take that same point and project it back on the look at site plan, it's in a different place. The site plan's in a different place. Mr. Rowe, did you want to?
The plan you're saying is the one we submitted with the revised correct one.
Yeah, yes, certainly. It's the one that came in March, Mr. Rowe, from yourself.
Yeah, no. So subsequent to that, in the Germany, I emailed it.
This was emailed during the adjournment. It's attached to an email of 11th of March from Mr. Rowe. And you sent him two, one for site C and one for D.
I believe that's accurate. I'll just bring this up. I think that clarifies the point.
Right, okay. Mr. Ward, you'd better come up.
Yeah.
Mr. Woods, do you want to come up? I want everybody to be aware. Accuracy of plans is fundamental. No, you need to come up here, Mr. Rowe. Just one from each side will do.
Yeah, I don't know where that one's.
Came from yourself.
Okay.
And the covering email, I can pull it up if we need to, but it said that it was a clearer version, and I took it to be because of the slightly fuzzy outline. That was what your email said.
What's quite handy is when I went on streetwise mapping, it actually shows in a different colour development that's taken place. So that made it much easier to accurately plot the 4 plots,
I've got that one.
right?
This came in later and superseded it. I think the correspondence was copied to the other parties.
No, that's what I believe.
Yeah, but I agree, yeah. So Inspector, that, the composite one that's essentially this one, isn't it?
Yes, that's the composite. That's the one that's prepared by the council. And in the light of that, I think we then had that, and then this was submitted as a clearer version of it.
Right.
And I think that's the same. I mean, you've got this distinctive bend here, which is, it's been drawn just below it. I'm not taking any issue with that.
For my clarity, you're saying this is correct, but that's incorrect?
No, I'm saying these are the same. This is clearer as you suggested, and everybody's happy with this. What I'm saying is that this is your site plan, because albeit at small scale, it shows what's going on the site. I don't think that is in the same place as that.
No, correct. I agree.
I think it's.
So if you look at the bend here, that's the point you're making.
Yes.
That should be shuffled over here.
That's right. So I don't think that plan is right.
I agree. The
And if
request
it's
I
not-
had was just to amend the location plan, just for clarity.
Well, I don't think then we've got a site plan.
Okay, we can do that. It's going to
But
be.
I'm not asking for plans at this stage. I'm
It's
asking
gonna
for.
be- Look, it's going to be at the same scale anyway. Clarity, this wasn't my plan. So I wasn't the original agent.
Right. So you agree? I think we've sorted it in terms of the plans I've got.
Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
But this is the one I submitted.
You've just put that down there, haven't you? You better take that away so I don't get.
So that's that. So that's the one I submitted since the adjournment. This one, Promethean, they've only been involved in the subsequent applications.
Okay. Can you?
Are we clear?
No, we're clear on that one. That's
That's
followed
right.
on the later version of it as well.
That's the one
In terms of the site plan. In
Let
terms
me-
of the-
Well, I didn't really want to delve into the full detail, but just given what Mr. Rose said, and because he's querying the plans, which these are the A4 plans that we agreed yesterday. I told you where I thought they'd come from. I've just called up the email, and there's an email of the 11th of March this year, which is the latest one relating to plans on site C and D. It's from Phil Rowe. It says, "Dear Pins Victoria, in advance of the appeals reopening, Rep Appeals C and D, please find attached updated, neater red line location plans from yourself." And there are 2 attachments. They are these plans. No, those were earlier. These are the latest plans.
These ones are incorrect. These are the correct ones. I agree with you at that point.
No, they're the same. The plans are the same. It's a neater red edge, that's all. The plan that's incorrect is your site plan, which you've just agreed to. Yes. Yes.
March this year, but the site plan was also emailed, if that's
No.
what you're saying.
No, the site plan's original.
No, well, that explains it.
I simply don't, given that we've agreed that the site plan is incorrect,
Yes.
I think I only have a red edge plan for sites C and D.
Yes.
Yes.
That's the upshot of it.
Yes,
correct.
but that is an agreed plan because we.
Yes, the C and D red edge is agreed.
Yes,
So I simply have a red edge where the proposal would be.
I'm grateful, sir, for investigating that.
Okay. Right, I'll put those to one side before
Inspector, just for your notes, that the plan that we've been looking at, the block plan, It's called in the appeal bundle, CD 1C.7 block plan. And
The one
it's-
that I think
yeah,
that
the
was
one-
incorrect.
Yeah, that's
Yes,
right.
it's on the core documents list.
Yeah, you've got it on the core documents.
Yes. Thank you. Right, other points and documents. We've talked about the conditions. Yeah, that's well in hand, as is site visits. That's been circulated, and no doubt there are other suggestions in terms of the site visit from all parties, and suggested revisions to conditions from the appellants. You'll come back on those.
Indeed.
Mr. Cottle, again, this is just doesn't have to be dealt with now, but it's like the point I made with Mr. Masters. Just a reminder to everybody. You were going to take instruction on a possible planning obligation.
Indeed.
So presumably that's still in hand.
That's right.
Yeah, that's fine. And then finally, point just to make things clear for Councillor O'Sullivan, because you'll be involved with in the landscape session this morning. I think I said this back in November, but just because you may not be familiar with the procedure, just as with the other parties, as you're participating on landscape, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions as well as present your own evidence if you wish. And as I asked Councillor Stern yesterday, I've got supplementary documents. I think you're from Hascom, I think. In a moment, so I'm just checking documentation. And Councillor Stern had a statement to put in yesterday. I would just wondered, have you got something similar? Right, have you got copies? Right, good. And I think there's some additional material as well that's already been submitted. Okay, thank you for that. I'll let you know when to come down. I just want to check, Mr. Cottle.
I do apologise for troubling you on this.
Yes.
I earlier mentioned the fact that I was concerned that I hadn't told you whether officers' reports were before you, and checked last night.
Yeah.
Because we've got extracts of the reports in the appellant's statement of case, and there were two statements of case put forward on behalf of Matthew and Mark Doherty in April 2023, and one put forward on behalf of Simon Doherty in December 2023. And on each of those appeal statements of case, there's a sort of travelling through of officers' reports, and each of them has a reference and quotes from an officer's report 2021-02392. And it makes the point in each of the appellant's statements of case that as this site is significantly more visible than the refused applications on the roadside due to the raised topography, the form and the wider, higher vantage points of Hascom Hill, which look down on the entire area. And so what is said in the statement of case is that this permission, the other side of the track and the permitted development on the other side of the track is what catches your eye from Hascom Hill. And I would like my learned friend to take an adjournment in 5 minutes to look at this officer's report, because it only repeats what is already set out in the statement of case, because the statement of case is actually extracted from the report, the relevant paragraph, and put it in there on page...
Yes, but there's a difference, Mr. Cottle, between an extract and the full document. I don't know if I've just seen the extract, I haven't got the context, have I?
No, so I want you to have the full report.
Yes, but I've already said there was an opportunity for that at an earlier stage.
Well, my attitude towards it's become more relevant since the supplementary statement was put in with the...
Yeah, and there could have been a response to the supplementary statement. I know it was even a few days beforehand would have been better than just before we're about to start evidence on this topic.
I thought the full report was before you, but I found that Mr. Ward had only copied the decisions, but not the reports.
Well, I'm extremely, I don't want to delay moving on to this topic now. I want to start evidence with the parish and Mr. Dudley. There'll be an adjournment and you can approach Mr. Lintott then and discuss it, and then I'll hear further from you.
It's no different to what's already in the extract. That's all it's got. The extract in the.
I thought you wanted to put the full report in.
But just so that you can see that.
Oh, I see what you mean.
It's all that's said on the subject.
Yes. Yeah, but we'll deal. We'll come to that later.
If I can just chip into this, it is a council document.
Yes.
So they would be aware, they're already aware of it. There'll be no surprise to them. But what's being said, which I think is absolutely perfectly right, and the High Court judge would want to if the extract is there, then normally the court will want to see the full document so we can put it into context. So
that's the point I just made, Mr. Masters.
I know, but it is quite normal for you to want to see it. You're depriving yourself of the full
I'm not
context.
depriving myself of anything. I'll reconsider it in due course.
Okay.
There's been an opportunity for discussion. The point I'm making is that there's been an opportunity for documents to come in advance, and that's how it should be. I don't want to keep repeating this point throughout the inquiry. At every stage, when somebody's submitted evidence, there's been an opportunity to put in counter evidence if that's felt necessary. And it hasn't been taken up in relation to this point.
I understand that, sir, and that's a fair criticism, but cases and inquiries evolve all the time, and with my respect.
Well, that was the whole reason for supplementary evidence being an opportunity for that.
At some point, the points become more important as one goes on, and seeing that point in the full context.
Well, I've explained how I'm going to deal with it. We don't need to discuss it further now. Mr. Cottle, was there anything else you wanted to raise? Mr. Masters, anything?
No, sir. I wanted to support Mr. Cottle. I've done that.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Lintott?
No, thank you.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the landscape topic. Councillor Sullivan, would you like to come down and find a convenient seat with a microphone, please? And could you hand out your statement? There needs to be copies for the two appellants, advocates. Did you say you got 9 copies? Right, so one for me, and then Mr. Cottle, Mr. Woods, Mr. Masters, and Mr. Rowe. I think Mr. Dudley and Mr. Lintott. If you've got a spare one, I'm sure Mr. Ward would like one as well. You've kept one for yourself. Yeah. And then when you're ready, Councillor Sullivan, if you could just perhaps introduce yourself to the inquiry, and then explain I think my understanding is, although you're from Hascombe, you're speaking on behalf of all 4 parishes in terms of this topic.
My name is Sarah Sullivan, and I'm speaking on behalf of Hascombe Parish Council. But may I just be permitted first to correct something that came up at the closing session yesterday afternoon, please?
Well, go ahead. I'll hear what you say.
When we were talking about the overdevelopment of caravans on Lydia Park, the point about whether these are occupied by travelling community or not touched on the layout and whether it had ever been built out in accordance with the respective planning permissions as traveller pitches. I think was said that by Mr. Woods or Mr. Cottrell that there was no evidence to say one way or the other. But if you look at the evidence submitted by Alfold Parish Council, reference CD 5D3, the aerial history of the site, it's clear that the field changed between 2020 and 2023 from open ground to a caravan park style layout from the outset. These caravans have clearly from the start been intended for public rent, as shown in the numerous adverts given in evidence, which make no reference to them being only for use by the travelling community. This is just a cynical commercial venture to profit from the shortage of cheap accommodation in the area, and nothing to do with providing a genuine need among the travelling community. Notwithstanding this, even if a very small number of these caravans have by chance ended up being occupied by people who meet the definition of gypsy Roma traveller, the number of vacant pitches far outweighs the need being expressed by the appellants, who could therefore very easily relocate onto the existing Lydia Park site on fully permitted pitch.
Okay. I don't want to go back into question of need, Councillor, which we did discuss it for some considerable time yesterday, but I just want to check one thing that you have said. In terms of the what we will see, I will see when I go on my site visit in terms of the layout of these areas with caravans and at Lydia Park. Are you saying that from your local knowledge, they've always been in that arrangement?
Yes.
Thank you. Do you want to carry on with your statement, please?
Okay, my statement is, I am the chair of Hascombe Parish Council. Our parish boundary lies on the northern edge of the appellant's sites. Hascombe is a treasured landscape that encourages tourism with spectacular views of the Weald and South Downs from public footpaths, public bridleways, vantage points, and from the Iron Age fort on Hascombe Hill. Hascombe Parish Council put in formal planning objections to the Stovolds Hill applications to extend onto the agricultural fields of the AGLV below the Surrey Hills National Landscape. Of the 4 parish councils who are making representations at this inquiry, Hascombe is situated in the Surrey Hills National Landscape, and the harm to this landscape from the uncontrolled recent growth is felt particularly strongly, not just by our residents, but by far wider reach. Hascombe Hills are promoted as an area of outstanding natural beauty for us all to enjoy, love, and protect. Issues mentioned by other parishes, such as dominance of our community, are also vitally important matters affecting our residents, but we will concentrate on landscape with this submission. The National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 189, is clear that great weight is given to conserving and enhancing landscape and the scenic beauty of the Surrey Hills National Landscape, which attracts the highest status of protection. Development within the setting should be sensitively located and designed to avoid or minimise adverse impacts on the designated areas. Waverley Borough Council Local Plan Part 1, Policy RE3, includes the following. The setting of the AONB will be protected where development outside the boundaries harm public views from or into the AONB. The Surrey Hills AONB Management Plan 2020 to 25, Policy P6. Development that would spoil the setting of the AONB by harming public views into or from the AONB will be resisted. The management plan, having been formally adopted, is a material planning consideration. In light of recent case law, serious consideration must be given to LURA, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act of 2023, Section 245. This imposes a new active duty on the relevant authorities, including planning authorities and planning appeal inspectors, to seek to further the purpose of conserving and enhancing the natural beauty of the area of outstanding natural beauty, now branded as a national landscape. DEFRA has guidance on applying this legal duty to protect the setting of a protected landscape. The setting of the national landscape is relevant. Why? Because it's currently under review to include further land to the south of Hascombe Hill and into Dunsfold. The first review since 1958, Evaluation Area 13. Feedback for this consultation closes on the 6th of June 2025, so we still have time. The photographic evidence presented at this inquiry shows the growth has affected the landscape. Mass hardstanding and more units introduced that breach planning regulations and conditions. All 4 appeals have invaded onto agricultural land and AGLV without justification. History shows that once a field border or ditch is crossed, trees cut down, vegetation is stripped, the rural landscape of that field is lost. In 2021, the boundary ditch was filled in and the trees that lined the boundary were destroyed. The agricultural land is now covered with hard standing, close bordered fencing, a new entrance off the B2130 constructed over what was originally a pond. This new entrance formed onto the B2130 blocks the drainage channels from Hascombe Hill, and further drainage ditches that were originally agricultural fields have been destroyed now, causing flooding and much surface water runoff due to the removal of topsoil, exposing the clay strata. In March this year, the flooding can be evidenced in aerial photographs. This is a functional connectivity with water from the protected landscape. In all 4 appeal sites, failed to conserve or enhance landscape and scenic beauty. In order to comply with local planning policy P1, the development must also accord with other relevant policies in the plan. The developments are contrary to those policies that seek to ensure high-quality, landscape-led developments and protect the tranquility characteristics of the area. The blatant cutting down of tree-line boundary, stripping of vegetation followed by the installation of blanket hard standing has little or no regard for existing drainage ditches, no regard for ecology, and total failure to conserve the landscape or scenic beauty. The pictures introduce a human element on the site, associated with artificial lighting, increased noise, disturbance from the residential use, and all the domestic paraphernalia associated with the development. This destroys any tranquility of the existing community and is one example of over-dominance. Dunsfold Parish Council will be speaking about the effect of lighting on our dark skies in terms of its impact on wildlife. Anyone travelling along the B2130 near the application sites after dark, cannot help but be shocked and appalled by the lighting emanating from the development. It can be seen in figure 2 of our submitted evidence. On approach, it resembles a large city, which is totally alien to our rural landscape. We have been fortunate to have some of the best dark skies in the country, benefiting from outstanding view of the stars and planets, which amaze visitors to the area. This beloved feature is being desecrated by aggressive uplighting that has no place here. Artificial light pollution on the intrinsically dark landscape has a catastrophic effect on nature conservation. This is and ecological connectivity where species are able to move across and between the protected landscape. On a personal note, I lead heritage walking tours. In 2020, I led a group around Reigate town centre. At the end of the walk, we sat talking. One member was describing her recent walk on Hascombe Hill and her shock at the extent of static caravans. She did not know I had any connection to Hascombe. This intrusion affects the setting of the Surrey Hills within the Peel sites, being less than 200 metres away from its boundary. In conclusion, with the recent surge in intentional unauthorised development, the local community fears that the previous good relations with the GRT community are being wantonly squandered by ostentatious disregard for the law. Our precious landscape is not just treasured by Hascombe residents, it's a valuable part of our country for everyone to enjoy. Natural beauty, tranquility, dark skies, a sense of remoteness, long views from rights of way, enjoyed by thousands, all contribute to the setting of this protected landscape. The recent harm can be reversed so that our landscape can be enjoyed by future generations. We urge you to dismiss the appeals. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Just one thing I'd like to ask you myself, first of all. The remarks you've made in, at the inquiry on your statement, do they apply equally to all 4 appeal proposals?
Yes.
Thank you. Right, it's time for questions from the advocates, Councillor Sullivan. I'm going to go to Mr. Cottle first of all. Mr. Cottle, he's representing the appellants in respect of Appeal B.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
I've just been looking at some of the officers' reports in relation to the various permissions for Lydia Park. And you must have been very disappointed when those permissions were granted.
No.
Because your council didn't object. The consultation responses are recorded in all of those reports. And there's consultation responses from Bramley, but Alford, but I didn't see one from your parish.
That's because we haven't always objected to certain applications by certain sites.
I see.
Sorry to interrupt, Ms. Cottle. Can you just check which, I didn't quite pick up which proposals you were referring to. Is it Lydia Park or the appeal sites?
Lydia Park.
Sorry, thank you.
And you're not aware whether or not there were any lighting mitigation measures imposed on the conditions in relation to those permissions on Lydia Park?
Bramley Parish Council has a dark night skies policy in their neighbourhood plan.
Have you asked the council whether they'd care to look at to see if there's a condition that could be enforced in respect of your concern over lighting at night?
No.
Now, I'd like to ask you a question about the area, if I may. And I've got a footpath plan, which has been handed up this morning, which is inquiry document 12. And I'm wondering if the councillor could be made aware of it. Oh, you've got it. Great. And first of all, in relation to the area, if I could just ask you about Loxley Road, which comes up towards Pratt's Corner, which is slightly to the left of Thatched House Farm, if I understand it, and it's below Hascombe Hill. Do you know of High Loxley Road?
I know the road very well.
And on the right of it, between Thatched House Farm and Pratt's Corner, there was a recently appealed development which was subject of litigation, went up to the High Court.
Yes.
And Protect Dunsfold and Waverley went to the High Court in relation to a fracking installation there.
We did object to that application.
And it involves drilling rigs 37 metres high.
Yes.
And they were talking about views from Hascombe Hill.
We did submit views from Hascombe Hill in our objection.
And they also talked about the AONB boundary, as it then was, review, and the fact that during the review, it was suggested that land to the west of High Loxley Road could be included within the national landscape, but land to the east, i.e. towards the appeal site, would not. Do you recollect that?
I do recollect it, but it doesn't get over the fact that it is area of great landscape value.
But you're agreeing with me that the suggestion by the people who carried out the review is not to extend the AONB to the left of High Loxley Road, to the east. They've suggested extending it to the west.
We were involved with the consultation. The consultation, the second part of it, finishes on the 6th of June.
Mr. Cottle, I just want to understand, make sure I'm looking, because of your last question, looking at the right area. And I've got Pratt's Corner.
So it's the
From
road
Pratt's
coming
Corner,
to
where
the
is High
south.
Loxley Road?
Is the road coming to the south? I think the councillor can confirm that.
Right, there's a very narrow road going due south, and then there's a yellowish road going southwest.
It's not the, well, I call it the road going due south towards High Loxley and Billinghurst Farm.
Right, so that's High Loxley Road.
And down towards the airport.
Yes, yeah, to Dunsfold Park. Right.
And the point really is that in your statement to the inquiry, you've suggested that there's a review underway, which is correct, and you suggested that it's to include further land south of Hascombe Hill, but you know that the experts who carried out the review in 2013, as I understand, have made suggestions, and what's going forward is the review board suggestions for consultation.
May I correct that? It's a recent evaluation and it's not 2013, but we're looking at 2023, 2024, 2025, and it's still under review.
And it's the suggestions by that review board that are going forward for consultation.
Yes.
And they have suggested that the AONB, or the national landscape boundary, be extended west of High Loxley Road.
But it doesn't get over the fact that it is area of great landscape value as well.
Fine. I'm just asking you a question. That they have suggested that the national landscape boundary be extended to the west of High Loxley Road. It's a yes or no answer.
It's a yes answer then.
Thank you. And therefore, the role of the, well, I'll take this up with Mr. Dudley, sir. Perhaps it's a landscape question.
Yes.
Perhaps I can ask you this, that below the fracking exploration infrastructure, there is towards High Billinghurst Farm a solar panel farm.
Yes.
And of course, we know about the houses that are going on the aerodrome, because you could see the aerodrome from the top of Hascombe Hill.
And your point is?
You'll see the houses too.
but that is under discussion.
Right, okay. I thought that the planning permission had been granted, but I'll stand to be corrected on that.
Mr.
It-
Masters, it's not.
We're not talking about over domination. We're just talking about the landscape effects, because I put it to you that if the Peel site were allowed, you would not be able to distinguish them from the rest of Lydia Park, from Hascombe Hill.
And your point is?
I'm just asking a question, that whatever would be permitted, if these permissions are allowed, wouldn't be distinguishable from Hascombe Hill, because the eye is drawn to the permitted pitches and the higher ground and to the aerodrome behind.
Councillor O'Sullivan, if it helps, I think what Ms Cottle's putting to you is that if the appeals are allowed, when you're in that on that vantage point, you wouldn't notice any difference. It's just asking whether you agree or disagree with that statement.
I want to say I disagree, because you just take a look at it at night and the lighting is just outrageous, whether it's the appeal sites or the Lydia Park site.
When it comes to lighting, there could be an issue of under enforcement by the looks of things, or the sounds of things.
The sun reflects on.
No, I'm sorry. It's one person at a time.
It's very noisy.
I think we're probably just going to agree to disagree, sir, on this.
But
Well, let me
the
just
photographs that we've submitted,
Councillor Sullivan,
sorry.
If you were up there on Hascombe Hill, you can see Lydia Park caravans. Do you think if you were up there and the appeals were allowed, that you would see, you would notice any real difference?
yes.
And can you explain why?
Well, with the new entrance coming onto the B2130, unpermitted, you see the lights coming on and off the site of vehicles. Not just the fact that it's lit up like a Christmas tree.
Could I just ask,
Of course, yes.
for you to indicate or put a cross on the plan where this new access way is?
Very easily on the Waverley Borough Council plan of flooding, which is this one.
Okay. Perhaps you could just put a cross where the new access is you're referring to.
It's where the water comes off Hascombe Hill, comes across the B2130 into a drainage ditch. There was a pond there originally.
That's what's said at the top of your statement, and I'd just be assisted if you could just put a cross on the map, and then we know where you're talking about.
I haven't got a red pen, I'm sorry, but I can point to it. It's where all the water comes together. So,
Councillor O'Sullivan, would you like to come out, and if Mr Cottle comes as well, and perhaps Mr Lintott and Mr Masters, do you want to come and see?
Yes.
You just well, once we know.
right here at the road.
Oh right, so it's on Dunsfold Road, isn't it?
Yes.
At the top, and
Dunsfold Road, right where water comes off Hascombe Hill, there's a pond here. It all drains
Oh, I
across
see.
this field.
and you're saying there's a new access? Well, there's going to.
There.
There. Right where there was.
Right, so that's to
What's a,
so that's to the north of the.
that's the main road.
Yes, that's the
That's the main road. It blocks it right there.
right, right.
In relation to that, have you spoken to the local authority about that?
Yes,
And they have active injunction proceedings that they took, and they know that the owners, and so they could presumably be taking action in respect of that access.
this is something I can't answer.
Right, not active proceedings, but they have all the details from injunction proceedings because they have in fact dismissed.
Anything else, Mr. Cole?
Thank you very much.
Mr. Masters, do you have questions as well?
Is this your, are you the author of this document?
We all, as a 4 joint parishes, we all talk, and my role was landscape.
So, I'm still, are parts of this document not yours, taken from people who read out quite legitimately, because that's how people do it. Is that how I understand this document?
From my professional point of view, I have to know about these things. So therefore I am expressing case law.
I just want to know whether or not these are all your words or something that helped you with some sections.
My CPD that I undertake, that I then talk with my other parish council members, and as a community of residents, it is not my personal point of view, it's community of residents for Askham, Bullfold,
Councillor
Bramley.
I think what Mr. Masters is asking you is how was the document prepared? Was there a discussion between representatives of, for example, the different parishes, and then were you given the task of drafting it up in the light of those discussions?
Yes, thank you.
How long have you been the chair?
A number of years. No.
How do you appear Morris before?
I have gone to appeals, inquiries, but I haven't always taken part.
Have you turned up a gypsy?
1, 2,
It's just you're a familiar face, and I've done a few cases the records.
probably.
Can I understand this from the answer you gave to Fred? The Askham House Council didn't object, is that right? Is that my understanding? To any of the park recent planning decisions promoted by council? Because I thought that's not right. You tell me. I thought Askham object.
We have objected.
You objected to the applications promoted by council. The ones that are now in granted plan petition at the Road Crown. You objected to this.
There have been so many applications, and I have a map of them here. Are you angling at trying to get at something in particular?
No, I haven't got that. You objected to most of those applications.
I would like to think that we had possibly written in a response.
Well, don't guess. No, so you don't know. I believe you, my understanding is consistently Ashton objects to gypsy proposal whether promoted by the council or by individuals.
Mr. Masters, I think I'm just not sure about the use of the term promoted. Are you suggesting that the council has been putting in applications for gypsy sites?
Sorry. I'm using a careless word, I apologise.
I don't think you mean that, do you?
I only say promoted in the sense of council, that it didn't go, it's beyond the, it didn't go to field, these ones.
Yes, but it could be misunderstood by the person.
No, I understand, so I'm sure that, but really, I don't know them, they're actually promoted at that point.
To mean that the council was the applicant. Right.
But the point is, the applications that were made and supported by council officers, as I understand it, has to be rejected, that they were granted in any event. That's the position, isn't it?
I've lived in Hascombe all my life. This is not a question I can really answer very well.
Let me try something else. All the Lydia Park sites, and you've got them up there, we've had a large number are overcrowded with an excess of the caravans and the planning. And that's been drawn to our attention by your colleague from the Upper Parish Council and by yourself earlier on today. That's right, isn't it?
Can you repeat the question again? Thank you.
The overcrowding will be part, the excess numbers of caravans. It's been something that was drawn to our attention yesterday and to you today. The very first opening remark of yours was about the overcrowding. That's right, isn't it?
The word dominance.
Okay. Then that's the one you word. It's about the overcrowding of those caravans, more caravans than there's planning. That's what we're talking about.
We are today.
Okay. Thought that's what we were talking about first thing today. So forgive me, tell me what action Hascombe Parish Council has taken with the District Council about those planned breaches.
That's not a question I can answer.
Well, do you know that any complaints have been made or any action has been taken? Or is it the only actions come here to complain about it today?
We have an ongoing, can't think of the term to use. We have an ongoing situation.
Well, that I understand, but could you answer the question? You're the chair of the parish council, so everything has to go via you. You must know of everything, because that's how parish council works. There has to be a vote on these things. So will you please tell me whether or not there's been one single complaint about the breaches to the planning conditions relating to Lydia Park in the last 3 years?
Are you saying, are we in dialogue with enforcement at Waverley Borough Council? Is that your question?
Yes, I want to know whether there's been any formal complaint to Waverley District Council about your concerns about the overcrowding on Lydia Park.
As a parish council and as a member of all 4 parish councils, there has been dialogue.
Sorry, can you just try and be precise? Hascombe Parish Council, I'm not asking about the other councils, I'm asking about your council, okay? Have you made any formal complaint about, not dialogue, any formal complaint about breaches of the conditions on Lydia Park? Yes or no?
I want to say yes, but I want to say no. So this is not a very easy question for me to answer because
I don't want to be different, Ms. Sullivan. What's your profession?
my profession is building surveyor.
Okay, so building surveyor. So you're a land surveyor, are you?
I specialise in historic buildings and the conservation of
Okay.
historic buildings.
So you're not-
Mr Masters, I mean,
I
we're
wasn't try-
interested in
only-
Councillor Sullivan's role as chairman of the parish council, not,
but only, sir, because
that's why she's here.
I know, sir, but forgive me, she obviously is a professional that understands the world we're living in relation to planning, and that's quite clear from her background. So I'm going to ask you again, you know the distinction between a formal complaint and just chatting. Has there been, don't say I want to say yes and I want to say no, because that doesn't help us. You'll know, has there been any formal complaint from this council in the last 3 years? Yes or no? The answer's no, isn't it?
Well, I think the answer is yes.
Well, okay. Tell me about what the formal complaint and how many there have been.
It's not something I can answer.
Forgive me, you've just answered yes, so you obviously can answer it.
Councillor Sullivan, has the clerk or a member of the parish council written to Waverley about the situation at Lydia Park? Or sent an email, something in writing?
We have.
And I appreciate you may not recall the exact numbers. Has it been on one instance in the last 3 years or on a number of occasions?
On a few occasions.
And what's Waverley's response been?
I can't answer.
Well, has there been any response? We know there's been no enforcement action. They've taken no action. We know they've taken enforcement action recently against new developments. And we know that there's a breach of condition notice in relation to one site very recently. Well, that's it, isn't it? What was their response to you?
Their response has been quite slow.
Unsatisfactory?
Quite slow.
Unsatisfactory or satisfactory as far as the parish council are concerned?
Slow.
Sorry, I'm going to ask you again. Satisfactory?
No, Councillor Sullivan, when you say slow, Councillor Sullivan, do you mean slow in terms of you're still waiting for it, or have you actually had a response but it's taken a long time to get to you?
It takes a long time to get to me.
So you have had something back?
Yeah.
And can you give us an indication of what Waverley have said in response to your concerns?
No.
Just one final question for now from me then. If you've had a response, why can't you tell us what they've said?
Because we have to live here.
You see, what I'm going to ask the inspector to draw from that is that you've not been happy with their response, but you don't actually want to say that because, as you rightly say, you have to live here. That's the position, isn't it? Isn't it?
I think possibly you're putting words into my mouth that I can't
Well, it's only
express.
because you're not explaining yourself very well so that we can understand to direct questions about whether or not the response has been one that's satisfied the parish council or not. And you refuse to answer that question a number of times. So I'm suggesting to you that that's what I'm going to be suggesting to the inspector and giving you the opportunity to comment on it.
Okay.
You don't want to comment on it. Okay. Let me try something else. I'll move on, sir. Thank you. We've established that Hascombe objected to quite some, if you like, of the permissions granted in Lydia Park. and we've established that you've made complaints about the overcrowding on those sites. Could you just, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back once. We've established that letters have been sent and then there's been a very slow response from the council. Could you just tell us when the first letter was sent? Was it a year ago, year and a half ago?
2002.
2002. So Haskin was complaining about activities on this site long before the appeals in this question was started. Yes?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's a clear matter of fact, isn't it?
Yes, yes. Thank you. And you've heard during this inquiry that the result of all of that is the only action that's being taken is a breach of condition notice. Are you satisfied with that action?
Yes.
You are. Do you know what that means? If it's not obeyed, there'll be a fine in the magistrate's court, and that'll be it. There won't be any injunctions to stop them doing it. There won't be any enforcement notices to take away the planning permission or anything like that. You're satisfied with that approach, are you?
There's very little that me as a parish can do.
Well,
Is there not?
I didn't ask you whether you were doing anything yourself. I was asking whether you were satisfied with the approach taken by the district council, your senior council. Yes or no? Are you satisfied? Is the parish council satisfied? Yes or no? Or is it yes and no because you're living here and you don't want to answer?
My note says you've already had an answer to that question, Mr. Masters. I just wonder if it's better to perhaps move off the technicalities of what the local planning authority is doing. And if you wish to pursue that, you've got Mr. Dudley.
It was important to establish what the parish council's view was, so Mr. Dudley doesn't represent that. But I'll leave it. I'm happy to leave that. When did the Hashcombe Parish Council, and in what form did it take, object to these planning permissions?
I believe all the submitted documentation and paperwork are within the papers that we have before us today, along with aerial photographs and additional evidence submitted between November 2024 and May 2025.
Thank you. One of the objections is based on the area being in the AGLV. Yes?
Yes.
Lydia Park is also in the AGLV, isn't it?
But it still affects the Surrey Hills national landscape.
No, not the question I'm asking you. Lydia Park is also in the AGLV.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you object? You told us you've objected to Lydia Park decisions on encroachment into the AGLV.
I believe we did, along with the oil drilling fracking site.
Yep. So you've taken a consistent objection on countryside in relation to Lydia Park as you're taking in relation to these sites, yes? Same objections, same arguments.
On dark night skies, environment, landscape setting.
Yep. And indeed on over domination, because when you objected to Lydia Park, it was based on the fact that there were already too many existing gypsy sites. Right, isn't it?
Yes.
Thank you. So all the arguments that you took, you're taking in relation to this site, were all rejected by the district council in granting all those permissions for Lydia Park, weren't they?
Many of those applications were one on appeal as opposed to being determined by Waverley Borough Council.
No, not true. The most recent decisions relating to Lydia Park were all ones determined by officers and not on appeal. And the inspector knows that's a fact.
That may be a fact, but it set an avalanche of applications when one particular site was one on appeal.
And forgive me if I'm not wrong, but didn't you also object on basis of service water drainage?
At that point, the drainage ditch along the concrete channel had not been blocked. The trees hadn't been cut down.
I understand that, but nevertheless, didn't you object because of concerns with service water drainage in relation to the sites at Lydia Park?
We would not have objected on drainage because drainage was working at that point.
Okay,
It's now not working.
okay. Okay. Oh, no further questions, sir.
Just one thing, in terms of the vantage points that you've referred to, you've referred to Hascombe Hill, looking down towards Lydia Park and the appeal sites. Is the place that you're referring to somewhere that is publicly accessible?
Yes,
On a public footpath?
yes. And it looks like this walking plan that's been submitted for the site visit is perfect.
Right. And I think in your response to the parish council's response, sorry, to the planning application, you referred to a location called Nor. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Nore, which
Oh, the Nor.
which I can see here on the same plan, and it's just the same point again. Are we talking about somewhere the public can go?
These are all very public footpaths.
Right. And when you have an opportunity, it would be useful for you to identify the particular locations on the plan that's circulating, so that I'm aware of where you'd like me to look at it from. That's
Okay,
it.
fantastic.
That's it, Councillor O'Sullivan.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good. Right, we'll take the mid-morning break now, and then we'll resume with Mr. Dudley after that. You can set up during the adjournment, it's entirely up to you. Oh, sorry, where?
In the room?
Did you, I mean, sometimes we've done it on that side,
No.
but I mean, for you.
I'd rather face the witness. I think I'm going to ask.
I can set up on the middle table if you like, sir. I've got quite a bit of paper to spread out, you see, so I'll need a bit of room.
Right, I was going to suggest, not literally in between Mr. Masters and Mr. Rowe, but in that chair, and ask them to shuffle around. But if you're happy, the only thing about the middle table, it's if you can get rid of all those wires, is where at some point I anticipate Mr. Masters may want to ask you some questions. Whether it's
The best position, if I may say so, is either the right-hand chair or left-hand chair.
well, that's going to cause problems with the advocates, I think.
Well,
It's going to move.
I was thinking, sir, if I sat on that chair there, I've got my back to Mr.
Yes.
Lintott, who I don't need to address, and then I can address you or Mr. Cotton
Well, you'd be-
or Mr. Masters.
You'll be talking to Mr. Lintop first of all. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, so Inspector, maybe if Alan Masters kindly suggested that he maybe could move around a little bit, and
Yeah.
as Mr. Cottle says, then a chair could be selected on the middle table in between the two of them, as you suggested.
Yeah.
And then we could all see them if Chris scoots around a little bit as well to give Mr. Masters some space. That might be that might not inconvenience people too much if we did it that way around.
Yeah.
Okay. I think so, yeah, because then he's got space and you can all see him.
Yeah, if you can move all those wires around. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. We're going to do that. Vacate the section.
All you need to do is shuffle a bit to your, if you shuffle a bit to your left, Mr. Masters, I'm sure that will work. Okay, we'll adjourn now and resume, please, at, I think that clock's a little bit fast. I'd like to keep it to 10 minutes. I know your room's downstairs, Mr. Masters, but.
Well, I know that Mr. Cottle wants to have a word with me, and his
does he?
room is
Right.
downstairs.
Of course, yes.
Because you asked that he do
Yes.
that, so I'm conscious that he'll be scooting up and down and won't maybe have time otherwise. So could we just have a bit more time?
Yes.
So we can do that.
Well, I make it 25 past, so resume at 22?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
It's just that it would be probably helpful if the local authority had somebody here. I know that Vicky isn't, to photocopy the report.
Well, she's interviewing someone this morning, you see, which is so she's not quite finished yet. So I don't know whether she'll be back in time, but yeah, well, we'll try that. But I mean, yeah. Okay. So thank you. We'll do the best we can,
Yes,
Inspector, to do
that's all we
whatever
can
we need to do.
Okay. If needs be, we'll just have to take that later on, Mr. Cott. Mr. Cott, we won't forget about it. Inquiries adjourned. Resume, please, at 22.
That one, and then there was one Donna Ricky's got emails.
You mind waiting just for a minute? Because Steve will be back in because he's in Oxford, so I'll probably say something, I'll get it wrong. Thank you very much. Right there, the most expensive one. Well, he's got that supermarket. So now okay, sorry, I was ignoring that. I wasn't ignoring you, I just wasn't observing. Reg, I have got that right, haven't I? We agreed that he would sit there, yeah?
It's as I expected. Right, next up is Mr. Dudley. So your first witness in the formal sessions, Mr. Lintott. 2 points about examination in chief. Sorry, Mr. Cotler, I'd forgotten you were going to come back on this.
That's
your conversation with Mr. Lintott.
That's right. There's no objection to this because the report doesn't go wider than
Right,
what's already copied before you in evidence. But it is important to see the whole report.
Yes, well, it usually is in terms of documentation. In that case, I'm happy to accept. Thanks, Mr. Cotler.
Before we start, you had a question, sir.
Yes, Mr. Woods.
You had a question, sir, about the plans.
About the
plans, the day room plans.
Yes, and whether it was drafted on it, because it's
Yes,
the
yeah.
copy I had draft on
It's-
it.
Yes, it does have draft on it, but it's not draft. There are two different types of day rooms.
There are, yes,
And because one has got a physio room on it.
yes.
The one with the physio room was SA 17002, and the other one relates to the other 2 day rooms, which is BS 412A100. So it does say draft on it, but it's the final plan.
Right, so I can put a line through draft issue.
Yes, sir.
Great. Good, thanks for clarifying that point. Thank you. Right, Ms. Flintots, yeah, just 2 points about examination in chief with Mr. Dudley.
Yep.
Mr. Dudley's got 4 separate proofs, large parts are in common.
Yep.
So obviously you'll take account of that
Yeah,
in examination.
I'll explain before we begin how we're going to deal with it.
Okay.
So hopefully just put it in a
And the-
easily digestible format.
And the other points, I'm obviously keenly aware of timings given where we are in the slippage we had yesterday. The estimate I've got from you for examination chief is 2 hours.
Yeah.
Are we going to be able to save some time?
Well, I'm only cautious because whenever I say that I'll save time, it quite often it turns out that one doesn't. But it does seem that an hour and a half might be something that we could aim for. We've obviously had some evidence and some touched on landscapes, so maybe we can foreshorten things. But you've got a good idea of what the site is and where it sits in the landscape and things. So I'll try and keep it short.
An hour and a half would be good because that would just take, I'd then run through to lunch.
No, I understand exactly where you're coming from.
Yeah, okay. Right, when you're ready, if you'd like to introduce Mr. Dudley.
In my experience, it takes longer if you don't do it like this than if you do, is to ask him to read out his personal credentials from his proof to start with, and then the summary and conclusions from site B. And that's what we will do. We will use site B as the sort of core site for him to concentrate on because of the overlap with witnesses from the appellants in respect of site B.
Mr. Masters, I'm sorry, there's a distraction going on with the conversation.
I'm sorry, so I thought I was quiet enough, so I apologise.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, sir.
So as I was saying, Inspector, we will we'll use site B and we will then come out from site B to the proofs for A to D where there's a difference. So you can use that as your core document for reference.
Okay, thank you.
And then in respect of where we are in the evidence, after we've read through the summary and conclusions for site B, there are a number of issues that have become crystallised on receiving the evidence from the other side that I will deal with as additional points.
Yes.
And just so you know where I'm going and you know where we are in the examination, I'll deal with it in this way. We'll deal with the correct approach to considering landscape and visual effects as the first point. And then we'll deal with, as the second point, landscape character. And landscape character splits into a number of sub-points. So for your note, the first of those, or I've called it little a, is the valued landscape point.
Yes.
Little b is the correct baseline point. Little c is the published character point. And then little d is applying that the way Mr. Dudley has assessed landscape approach and the results. Little e is the way that Mr. Woods has done it. And little f is any points such as there are, and I appreciate we've got very little in writing from Mr. Rowe, but if the couple of points he makes additional, I'll deal with at that point so that they're not duplicated.
Yes, thank you.
And then point 3 is the visual environment, and I won't break that down. We'll just go through the receptors that have been identified. So that's the structure. So with that as an introduction, good morning, Mr. Dudley. Could I ask you please just to turn up your Appeal B proof, which for the inspector's note is at CD 8B.2. And to start, please, by reading your personal details from that document on page 5, 1.1 and following.
Good morning, sir. It's worth noting I've changed company since preparing my original evidence, so I will give you a live version, if you like, of that. So anyway, my name's Ian Dudley, and at the time of preparation of most of my evidence, I worked for Nicholson's. I'm now Director of Rowellian Environmental Consulting. I hold a Bachelor of Science Honours degree in Forestry from Bangor University. I'm a chartered member of the Landscape Institute, a chartered member of the Institute of Chartered Foresters, and a chartered member of the Society for the Environment. My company, as it currently stands, provides professional advice in the areas of landscape architecture, green infrastructure, natural capital, and environmental planning. My professional experience over the last 25 years has included land management, management planning, green infrastructure planning and assessment, landscape and visual impact assessment, landscape character assessment, green belt appraisal, landscape design and landscape planning. I've contributed to the landscape sector at regional and national levels, sitting on panels and committees for the Landscape Institute, Natural England and DEFRA on matters such as the development of the National Green Infrastructure Standards and Biodiversity Metric. I've served as the chair of the Royal Forestry Society for England, Wales and Northern Ireland, and I'm currently the vice chair of the Landscape Institute's East Midlands branch. I'm an experienced landscape witness, having acted on behalf of both public and private sector bodies for over 10 years, and for a range of development types, including residential, leisure and industrial developments. I'm familiar with the site in question and its landscape setting, having undertaken an accompanied site visit on the 3rd of October 2024.
Now, if you turn forward to section 7, we can see your summary and conclusions for site B, and I'd ask you to read that through, and then I'll take you through the topics in the order I gave them to the inspector.
Certainly. So under first heading, baseline context, and all of my proofs are structured similarly, sir, so I'll just focus on this one, as Lintop mentioned. So in the case of Appeal B, the site represents an area of naturalistic open countryside comprising a wooded stream corridor, overgrown hedgerow and scrubland that lies perpendicular to the northern boundary and access track to the existing Lydia Park Gypsy and Traveller site. The site itself is located within an area of great landscape value, a local designation recognising its function as a buffer to the Surrey Hills national landscape. I'll use the new term, sir, if that's okay with you throughout, and also its own inherent landscape quality. The site is part of a wider field that provides the only remaining buffer between Lydia Park and the nationally important landscape of the Surrey Hills national landscape to the north, and it extends approximately halfway across this field. In particular, the wooded stream corridor located within the site provides an important visual barrier, helping to reduce the impact on views from the national landscape. Under the heading Proposed Development. The proposed development comprises the removal of all vegetation within the site and the creation of 3 gypsy and traveller pitches and a parking area. The entire site is proposed to be surfaced. The 2 southernmost pitches would comprise a brick and tile utility room, a mobile home and space for a touring caravan. The northern pitch the northern pitch would comprise a twin unit chalet bungalow, a brick and tile utility room and space for 2 touring caravans. The site is proposed to be surrounded by a hedgerow which would also divide the pitches. Current ground conditions, as observed on site, would make the successful establishment of a hedgerow extremely difficult. Under the heading Existing and Authorised Development. The site has been cleared of all vegetation, partially surfaced and subject to the placement of mobile homes, mobile day rooms and touring caravans. This includes the clearance of the wooded stream corridor and overgrown hedgerow that visually separated Lydia Park from the Surrey Hills national landscape. The watercourse that ran through the site has been culverted, leading to upstream waterlogging that has resulted in the extensive mortality of trees within the wooded stream corridor on an adjacent area of land. Under the heading Landscape Appraisal Results. To assist the inspector in understanding the full scale of impact of the proposed developments, I've undertaken my own landscape appraisal. In this, I've considered the combined character of the site, its relationship with Lydia Park, the wider open field in which it is located, and the Surrey Hills national landscape as receptors. For each of my identified receptors, I've considered the impacts of the proposed development informed by the unauthorised development activity that has taken place. The results of my landscape appraisal are as follows. On the overall character of the site, major adverse effect. On the immediate presence of Lydia Park to the south, moderate minor to minor adverse effect. On the wider open field to the north, major adverse effect. And on the relationship with the Surrey Hills National Landscape, major adverse effect. Landscape appraisal conclusion. It's the conclusion of my landscape appraisal that the proposed development would result in the loss of an area of naturalistic open countryside typical of the low weald that makes a positive contribution to the area of great landscape value in which it is located and the setting of the Surrey Hills National Landscape, and that this would lead to a detrimental erosion of the prevailing landscape character. The proposed development would therefore fail to protect, let alone enhance, this valued landscape, and it would not enhance the character and environmental quality of the setting of the national landscape. My appraisal found that multiple adverse impacts of major significance would occur upon highly sensitive receptors, including significant harm to the site itself, the wider field in which it's located, and the setting of the Surrey Hills National Landscape. I therefore conclude that the proposed development is inappropriate on landscape grounds and that my evidence supports the Council's landscape reason for refusal. Under the heading Visual Appraisal Results, in addition to the landscape appraisal outlined above, I've also undertaken my own appraisal of the visual impacts of the proposed development. The identified visual receptors of the proposed development are the users of public footpaths Hascombe 279 and Bramley 277 and the users of Dunsfold Road. The results of my visual appraisal are as follows. On the users of public footpath Hascombe 279, major moderate adverse effect. On the users of public footpath Bramley 277, major adverse effect. And on the users of Dunsfold Road, major to moderate adverse effect. My appraisal also concluded that it is not possible to reduce these effects through any additional mitigation measures. Visual appraisal conclusion. Based upon my appraisal, I anticipate that the proposed development would result in significant adverse visual effects upon highly sensitive receptors within a nationally important landscape. I therefore conclude that the proposed development is inappropriate on visual grounds and that my evidence supports the Council's landscape reason for refusal.
Thank you, Mr. Dudley. So could we then move to the first of those issues I identified, Inspector, which is the correct approach to considering landscape and visual effects? And could you just help the Inspector with reference to Glavia 3 and where one derives from that document the importance of things such as transparent assessment methods and who is carrying out the assessment? And then I'd like you to go on to take the Inspector to just where he sees what the procedure is for assessing landscape effects.
That's absolutely fine. So if you would turn at core document, it's 11.
It is, yeah. Glavia 3.
Yes, it is. Oh, you have a copy. Fantastic. That's excellent. So in which case, I would ask you to turn at paragraph 2.24, which is on page 21 of the document. Do you have that, sir?
Yes,
excellent. Okay, well, if I can indulge myself by indulge you with reading from paragraph 22.24. The role of professional judgment is also characteristic of other environmental topics such as ecology or cultural heritage, especially when it comes to judging how significant a particular change is. In all cases, there is a need for the judgments that are made to be reasonable and based on clear and transparent methods so that the reasoning applied at different stages can be traced and examined by others. Professional judgments must be based on both training and experience, and in general, suitably qualified and experienced landscape professionals should carry out landscape and visual impact assessments.
So could I ask you just then to help the Inspector with the importance, if it is important, when looking at how significant a particular change is, that exercise is gone through in the way that paragraph suggests?
Yeah, that's right, sir. So, I mean, the emphasis there is on clear and transparent methods that enable you as the decision maker to interrogate the judgments that have been arrived at. and that those judgments are undertaken by somebody who is suitably qualified and experienced to draw those judgments in a similar manner to, you know, other, as it says, other environmental topics. And so, sir, if I would ask you to turn up figure 5.1 on page 71 of the book. This sets out the correct process for the consideration of landscape effects. And so you can see, sir, beginning with identifying the characteristics of the proposals and the scope of assessment, because proportionality applies to this process. The next fundamental step is establishing the landscape baseline using landscape character assessment, and then using that baseline study to identify landscape receptors, identifying the interactions between the proposals and those receptors, and using that to form judgments on landscape effects. And you can see there, so halfway down, the flowchart splits in two, into sensitivity and magnitude of effect. So to the judgments made on the susceptibility and value of each receptor combined to give an overall judgment of sensitivity, and judgments on the various factors that give rise to the magnitude of change on the other side, which then in themselves combine to give an overall judgment on the significance of the landscape effect. Bearing in mind, effects can be adverse, neutral, or beneficial. And you can see there's a sort of little feedback loop there for the potential for mitigation in certain cases, which gives rise to the final statement of effects.
And then could you also just quickly take the inspector to where he would find a similar flowchart in respect of visual effects before we go and look at how it's been done in this case?
Absolutely, sir. And yes, bearing in mind that time's pressing, I'll just sort of show this to you so that you can see it. It's on page 99 of the document, and you can see it's a very similar flowchart, follows the same, you know, it's the standard EIA structure, basically. Okay.
Excellent. So with that as a very brief whistle-stop tour of how Glavia tells you to do it, Inspector, you'll have seen within that series of flowcharts the reference to landscape character. And I want to just explore that, moving on to issue 2, landscape character. Why is it important to establish the landscape character and use that as a framework to arrive at a baseline and assess the impacts? And to do that, the first issue that I've got is the issue of valued landscape, and that's the issue I talked about as little a. And so, Mr. Dudley, I'd ask you please to help the inspector with what help the inspector can derive on the issue of valued landscape from the appellant's evidence. And then I want you to help him by taking him to where he sees what approach one should take for landscape value in your evidence.
Okay, well, so you'll find no reference within the appellant's proofs to valued landscape. So it's silent on the matter of the paragraph 187 of the NPPF. But, sir, fundamentally, the appeal sites are all located within an area of great landscape value. And they're within the setting of a national landscape within 160 metres of the boundary of that national landscape.
Now, I'll ask you to pause there for a moment. So, Inspector, for your note, you'll remember that in terms of a statement of common ground, we don't have it as agreed at the moment that this is a valued landscape, and we don't have it as agreed that we're within the setting of a national landscape. So I'm going to have the witness address both of those topics in his evidence, because I don't know to what extent those issues are agreed. So pausing there for a moment on those two topics and dealing with the first of those, a valued landscape. Are the appeal sites within the valued landscape? And what does that mean if they are, and why?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, sir, as I said, the appeal sites are within an area of great landscape value, and they're within the immediate setting of a national landscape. And therefore, it's my professional opinion that it stands to reason, and there's no logical reason why they should not be considered as a valued landscape. It's by definition. And so that engages paragraph 187A of the National Planning Policy Framework, which requires the protection and enhancement in a manner commensurate with the local plan. And the the local plan says in its policy, and sir, at this point, I would ask you to turn up paragraph 2.8 of my Appeal B proof.
Just while you're doing that, Inspector, I'll say that the way this witness has gone about things, just to make it easier, is to try and refer to documents within his proof. So you've got quotations, relevant quotations from them. So you don't need to every time go into a core document and find which one it is. But the local plan, you'll know, just for your note, is at CD 6.6. But it's 2.8 that we need to look at for the relevant extract.
Okay, so sir, I quote directly from policy RE3 small 2 of the local plan, which relates to the area of great landscape value, and it says the same principles for protecting the AONB will apply in the area of great landscape value, which will be retained for its own sake and as a buffer to the AONB. Until there's a review of the Surrey Hills AONB boundary, whilst recognising that protection of the AGLV is commensurate with its statement as a local landscape designation. So that's the manner in policy. It says the same principles will apply, basically. So I'm in no question that this is a valued landscape, and therefore that para 187A of the NPPF applies.
Just one thing on that, sorry to interrupt Mr. Winthrop, but it relates directly to the question of a valued landscape. Have you given consideration, Mr. Dudley, to box 5.1?
Yes, I have. Well, only in the sense that box 5.1 to a certain extent has been superseded by Landscape Institute Technical Note 0221. Which is titled Assessing Landscape Value Outside of Designations. Because if a landscape is designated, it is generally considered to be a valued landscape. And the very title of this, an area of great landscape value. Well, if how can that not be logically considered? So I haven't undertaken an independent assessment. Should we have been located outside of a designated landscape, then my standard method is to apply the criteria within the Landscape Institute's technical note, which bears great, it's quite similar to box 5.1, but it's an evolution of those criteria. But in this case, no, it's the fact that it's in an area of great landscape value, the fact that it's in the setting of a national landscape led me to the conclusion that it is a valued landscape, and because it's designated, it doesn't require that assessment. That assessment has essentially already been made in the designation of this landscape.
And with that in mind, though, Inspector, given that you've raised the 5.1 and TGN point, can I just ask you, Mr. Dudley, to take the Inspector to the Inspector Willow's decision at Burnt Hill, which we've got in a number of the documents. Inspector, for your note, it's where I'm looking at it is in the appendix to Mr. Jarman's evidence, which is in CD 8A.4. And it's the final appendix in that, which is appendix 16. I think he also put it in as an appendix to his supplemental evidence. Within that, when we were doing that appeal, he's split the issues into a number of issues, and the third issue was character, appearance and landscape on his page 10. So if you look at page 10 of that decision, and paragraph 48 is where he looks at the AGLV designation and the significance of it there. So just while the Inspector finds that, Mr. Dudley, if you could just pause a second.
Of course. That's Mr. Ward to pass me my glass of water just there. Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Got the Burnt Hill appendix up now.
Brilliant.
Where are we going?
So we need to go to page 10, paragraph 48.
Right, yes.
And just again, for your note, Inspector, this is the matter that the witness deals with in his rebuttal evidence, and he quotes from this section at paragraph 2.15 of that decision. But perhaps if we can just pause there, and Mr. Dudley, in the light of the question the inspector asked, can you just help him with paragraph 48 and how that relates to the answer that you've given, please?
Of course. So this is an appeal that took place in this very room relating to a site called Stovolds Hill, where I was landscape witness again for the council. And it was dealing with the fact that there were consented gypsy and traveller pitches directly adjacent to the site in question on that particular appeal, and the implications on the valued landscape status of the area of great landscape value. And so you can see in paragraph 48, the opinion of Inspector Willows, which aligned with my evidence, was that in any event, while the qualities of individual parts of the AGLV may vary, it seems to me that the designation is a reflection of the overall character of the AGLV, and it is the landscape as a whole that is valued. Consequently, paragraph, and it's of course the old reference, 180A of the framework, which seeks to protect valued landscapes, applies to this site.
And Inspector, for your note, these paragraphs obviously changing all the time. That's now, I'm sure you're aware, 187 of the new version of the NPPF. Yeah. Excellent. So just to be clear then, when the inspector is coming to his determination on this appeal and dealing with the valued landscape issue, what does 187A say that one needs to do in relation to sites that are in a valued landscape? And where is he in respect of these sites?
Well, sir, the policy requirement is to protect and enhance valued landscapes. And as I previously mentioned, it's my professional opinion as a chartered landscape architect, based on the evidence before me, that there is no question whatsoever that this is a valued landscape.
Excellent. All right. So I just want to pick up on one point that arose from the way in which Mr. Cottle opened his case, and he referred to a decision of Inspector Gilbert, which again, I don't say you need to turn it up, Inspector, but it's at CD 3A.8.
3A.8.
CD 3A, well, 3A.8, but it's in all of the
Yes.
appeals in a similar reference.
Yeah.
And in respect of that decision, the way that Mr. Cottle put it was, well, he agreed with what Inspector Gilbert had said in respect of AGLV. Can you just help the inspector with that decision and whether that in any way causes you to differ from your assessment and what based upon what Inspector Willows has done, and what has Inspector Gilbert done in that decision?
So on that particular decision, it's clear from that decision that the council didn't call a professional landscape architect as part of that case, and in that particular case, the matters of the AGLV and national landscape weren't advanced. So based upon that, Inspector Gilbert relied upon what is now 187B of the National Planning Policy Framework, which is recognise the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, and nevertheless, implying that lower bar of policy, Inspector Gilbert found, in any case, unacceptable harm on the character and appearance of the countryside from the scheme that was before her, which was a scheme north of the access track to Lydia Park. So even applying a lower bar in terms of the policy test then. But in my opinion, had I been involved in that appeal, then the matters of the AGLV and national landscape would have been advanced because it's a material policy consideration. But nevertheless, the landscape harm was found to be a material matter.
Thank you. So, Inspector, I'm going to move on to issue 2 little b then, the correct baseline. So you've taken the inspector through the relevant parts of the Purple Book to look at how one assesses landscape and visual harm. Can you help him then in respect of the correct baseline, how that's relevant and where we start from with these 4 sites?
Yeah, absolutely. So intentional and authorised development cannot be considered in the baseline assessment of a scheme. And so the authorised condition of all of these sites is part of an open field that sits between Lydia Park and the National Landscape that includes a wooded stream corridor and an overgrown hedgerow, both of which serve to screen Lydia Park from the National Landscape. Now, in my opinion, the appellant hasn't correctly approached landscape baseline. The only baseline site description is offered up in the statement of case for Appeal A site, and that's in CD 2A.2 in paragraphs 3.1 to 3.4. And this was authored by Mr. Woods, and it almost entirely focuses on the setting of the site, not the site itself. The only reference to the site is the presence of 2 mature trees within the site. But that itself is incorrect to the baseline condition. 2 mature trees were retained when the site was cleared, but the correct baseline status of that site is that it was entirely covered with trees.
And so, and as I explained at the outset, obviously we've got these 4 overlapping, very similar but not identical appeals. So the inspector has got it clear in his head in relation to each appeal what the baseline is. Can you just take him through each one of the appeals where you've got your figure which shows what the baseline was, your figure 3 in each proof? You've talked about appeal site A there. And the presence of the trees. So perhaps on this matter, it's worth looking at A first and then take us through B, C and D in relation to the relevant figures in those proofs as well.
Absolutely, sir. So if I would ask you to turn up page 13 of my Appeal A proof first. And at the top of that page, you should see figure 3. And so the I've used the sort of historic imagery regression tool within Google Earth to gain an understanding of what the correct baseline condition of the sites is, and so I used the images from June 2018, which were some of the clearest and easiest to understand. So you can see here I've approximated the red line boundary of the Appeal A site. And as the figure 3 clearly shows, it's part of the wooded stream corridor. It's entirely covered with woody vegetation. In the northern part, you can see the canopies of the 2 mature trees, and you can see other trees and vegetation to the south of that. And then to the north of that, you can see in the sort of top left of the image, the overgrown hedgerow that runs parallel to the wooded stream corridor. So that is the Appeal A site. And then, sir, I'd ask you to turn to my Appeal B proof. Similar exercise. This is on page 12.
And just pause while the inspector turns that one up as well, please.
Okay, so and figure 3 is at the bottom of page 12. Again, for convenience, I've approximated the red line boundary. And what you can see in this one, this is a much larger site than Appeal A. So in the southernmost part, you can see the wooded stream corridor that comes through with the Lydia Park access track to the south of it. And then you can see the hedgerow that runs parallel to that. And then beyond that, extending towards the National Landscape, there's an open sort of scrubby field, which is quite typical of the low weald countryside.
And then if we can just for completeness have a quick look, so the inspector's got the references for C and D.
Absolutely. So Appeal C proof, it's page 12 again. So if you look at figure 3, bottom of the page, what you can see in relation to figure 3 is that it sits out in the field. So there's the wooded stream corridor, and the proposed access runs through that corridor. And the site itself is located at approximately 100 metres from the Lydia Park access track. So it occupies an isolated position within the middle of that field. And similarly, sir, I won't dwell on this, but if we turn to very quickly to page 12 on my Appeal D proof as well, you can see the same context. The only difference, sorry, I'll let you turn that up first, sir, and then I'll speak. There's a lot of juggling on this appeal, unfortunately. And so you can see again, sir, and this particular, the Appeal D site is slightly closer. It's approximately 80 metres set back from the access track to Lydia Park, but nevertheless, you can see it sits distinctly separate from Lydia Park, with the wooded stream corridor in the intervening ground is the correct baseline position.
Excellent. Thank you. So,
and sir, sorry, just one thing. I'd ask those isolated positions of C and D, bearing in mind we're considering the appeals individually, I'd ask you to especially take that in mind when considering the prominence of sites from the elevated ground to the north.
So, Inspector, if we can then move on to issue little c, representation of published character. Now, again, we've looked at the Purple Book and we've seen how it tells you that published character needs to be taken into account. So can I go through the same exercise, please? And can you help me with, firstly, what the appellant's proofs do in relation to this factor? And then I want you to, using Appeal B, again, as the template for the inspector so that he looks at it in one place, I want you to take him through the essential parts of the published character which feed into the assessment that you've done.
Yeah. So there is no reference whatsoever within the appellant's evidence to the published character of the landscape. As we looked at in figure 5.1 before, the baseline assessment relies upon published landscape character. So the published character for reference is set out. There's Natural England's National Character Assessment, which looks at national character areas, and that's CD 11A.4. And if you're happy, sir, I'll just take you to summaries within my evidence rather than, and then also the at local level, the Surrey Landscape Character Assessment, which is CD 11A.5. And so I'd ask you to briefly take up the Purple Book again when you're ready and turn to paragraph 5.12 on page 77. And you can see halfway down the sentence in paragraph 5.12, the first step in preparing the landscape baseline should be to review any relevant assessments that may be available at different levels in this hierarchy. And the hierarchy they're referring to is essentially national to local level assessment there, sir.
Excellent. So can we then, bearing in mind that we're going to look at it through the veil of your evidence, go to section 3 of your evidence, where you've taken us through the essential components of that published character in relation to a series of LCAs, and you've helpfully provided us with a emboldening in respect of each of which elements you say are relevant from that particular character assessment. So if the inspector can turn up page 14 of Appeal B, and if we can then start, if you can take us through, starting with your paragraph 3.3, what the relevant aspects of published character are for this case.
Yeah, so my general approach when I'm considering published character is to start at the widest level and then narrow into the site. So in my section 3, I first identified the site falls within the low wheeled national character area under Natural England's assessment. In 3.2, I broadly described the low wheeled as being a wet and woody, broad, low-lying clay vale. which is well reflected within this countryside. And yes, at 3.3, I've set out the published key characteristics of the low wheeled, and for convenience, I've highlighted those that I consider to be represented by the site in its landscape setting.
And then you summarise at 3.4, taking those elements into account. I would just ask you, given that the inspector has asked in his questioning of the previous witness about a particular location at Nore, I've jotted that down, N-O-R-E, Nore, and one can see that on the little map that you've provided. Can you just help the inspector with whether there are any elements of that national landscape character which might be relevant when one's looking at that location?
Absolutely. So immediately north of the word Nor, you can see a pond. Ponds are a very characteristic feature of the low wheeled.
So just because we're looking at this for the first time, so I can obviously see where the word Nor is.
Sorry,
but,
sir,
in terms of the inspector, can you just wait while he grabs your map and then just demonstrate where that is on the walk that you've suggested?
Yeah, it's at the sort of northernmost point. You can see the word Nor.
And then turn it around so Mr. Masters and Mr. Coffin can see it well, just so that they're.
There we are.
Brilliant.
And so you can see sort of scattered throughout this landscape, most of the farmsteads are accompanied with a pond. You can also see scattered areas of woodland again throughout this landscape. So Connie Burrows accompanies Nor. To the east, on the B2130, there's Furfield Copse, south of, and then further to the south of the appeal sites, there's the Birchets, High Loxley Firs. So this wet and woody character is extremely well expressed within this landscape. The field sizes are relatively small. The pattern of the fields is irregular. Again, this is all an expression of the historic low wheeled landscape.
And what about the penultimate emboldened item? You've got traditional rural vernacular of local brick, weatherboard and tile hung buildings, plus local use of distinctive Horsham slabs as roofing material. Is that something that one might be expected to see or not in places like Nor and Coney Burrows?
It certainly is, yeah. In that location, there's buildings which very much express the local vernacular. Equally, within Dunsfold to the southwest, again, there's a lot of vernacular architecture, and many of these farmsteads, which you see scattered within the landscape, which is the identified settlement pattern, the actual farmhouse will express the local vernacular.
Just pause there for a moment while we just jot that down. And so if we look at 3.4 and you have considered it to be strongly representative of the low wheeled national character area, can I ask you then to move on to the next character area that we've got that you consider and just take us through that one briefly?
Absolutely. So at a local level, the Surrey landscape character assessment, that placed the site within the wooded low wheeled landscape type. And which
perhaps if you just explain very briefly in terms of the way that the Surrey LCA is set out and arranged, you're talking about landscape character areas and landscape types. And so you go on to talk about that at 3.7. Can you just explain the difference between the two, just in case the spectators?
That's right. So within an assessment area, landscape types can occur in several places. And they are areas which have common characteristics expressed across the assessment area. And so, for example, it might be, sloping wooded ground, for example, might be something that occurs in several areas, and it might be allocated the same landscape type. But then each landscape type is broken down into geographically specific landscape character areas. So for each of those bits of wooded sloping ground, it might have its own identity, and that's exactly what's happened here. So the wooded low wheeled landscape type is broken down into several landscape character areas. It's expressed with WW and then a number. And so the site itself is located within the Graffham to Dunsfold wooded low-wheeled character area. And Dunsfold Road represents something of a watershed within this landscape. It's the boundary of the national landscape, and it's the boundary for a reason, because it's where the character changes from the low-lying countryside, agricultural countryside of the Low Weald up into the green sand hills of Hascombe Hill. And so that's expressed in the landscape character assessment because the land to the north of Dunsfold Road falls within the Pinks Hill to Park Hatch landscape character area, which is WW4.
So just pausing there for a moment, we can see at 3.7 that you come to a conclusion on the landscape type, and that you say that it's strongly representative of that landscape type at 3.8. And then you, at 3.12 and 3.14, you go on to look at the landscape character areas that you've just described. The first being at 3.12, the Grafton to Dunsfold wooded low-wheeled character area, and the next one being the Pinks Hill to Park Hatch wooded low character area. And the inspector can see your conclusions there in respect of whether they are, how representative they are in respect of both of those. Is there anything that you want to draw to the inspector's attention about that other than what you've got written down, or are you happy with that summary that he's got there of all of the emboldened parts?
Yep, I think I'm largely happy with how I've expressed that. So
Yeah.
we'll.
I just want to be clear on 3.11, Mr. Dudley, and where,
Of course.
The boundary between WW4 and WW5, the road there, that's the same road that's on the north side of the field.
Correct.
Right.
That's it. Dunsfold Road.
That's the same Dunsfold Road. So the
Yep.
land to the north within WW4.
Yes, the land to the north
national
is.
landscape.
It is also the national landscape. That's correct.
And WW5 is the AGLV.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Excellent. And then perhaps, given the inspector has raised that point, and given that you've assessed it at 3.14 against WW4 also, even though the site obviously is below Dunsfold Road, so it doesn't come within WW4, it comes within WW5, you've assessed that it's strongly representative of WW4 and it is present all of those 9 characteristics. Can you perhaps, by reference to your figure 5, just explain to the inspector why you've done that and what the relationship is between the site and that character area?
Absolutely. So, so if you turn up figure 5, which is on page, I think it's page 20. Sorry, bear with. Yes, page 20 of my Appeal B proof. It's a photograph taken from within the Appeal B site.
And so if you can explain to the inspector then what he sees in that photo in respect of where WW5 is located and WW4 is located. And also given that one of the issues you'll remember, Inspector, that I've said you're going to need to look at is the setting of the national landscape, because it's not agreed in the Statement of Common Ground that it's within the setting of the national landscape. So I want you to help the inspector with that issue, looking at this photograph as well.
So the picture was taken from the southern part of the Appeal B site, looking longitudinally along that site towards the national landscape. And you can see, so the foreground of the view, it's that level landscape, which is quite typical of WW5. The vegetation to the right of the view is kind of scrubby, wet ground vegetation, which again is very typical. And then you can see the elements, the statics and touring caravans, etc., within the Appeal B site. And then rising behind that, you can see Hascombe Hill. So all of that land in the backdrop of that view is within the Surrey Hills National Landscape, and it's within WW4, the Pinks Hill to Park Hatch landscape character area.
So it's not part of the field that's rising beyond Appeal Site B?
Sorry, sir. Can you...
It's not part of the field that goes up to Dunsfold Road. You're saying that what I can see with the trees on is beyond Dunsfold Road?
Yes, that's right. Beyond what you can see is above the statics,
Yes.
you can see an area of open field. So that lies beyond Dunsfold Road. And it's the land that surrounds, if you look on my route plan that I gave you, it's the land surrounding Park Hatch Farm up to Connie Burrows. So that's that open field that you can see there. And then you can see a wooded horizon, which is the wooded top of Hascombe Hill. And so it's my view, sir, that there is clearly a perceptual relationship between these appeal sites and the national landscape. Because if you stand on the appeal sites, it forms the backdrop to these sites. And furthermore, it stands to reason and is demonstrated in views that if you stand in that open field on the edge of the woodland, you can equally see the sites. And indeed, as the winter views are demonstrated, even if you stand in certain locations within the woodland in winter, you can see back towards the sites. So, sir, appreciating it's a matter of dispute, my professional opinion is that there is not a shadow of a doubt that the site sits within the setting of the national landscape.
I appreciate we're looking at the Appeal B proof on this occasion, but is your conclusion the same in relation to the other appeals as well, or is it different in relation to those?
Visually, the B, C and D sites have a visual relationship with the national landscape, and the Appeal A site is to a great degree screened from the national landscape because the hedgerow to the north has been preserved in that particular case. However, as we know from the Purple Book, landscape effects are not reliant upon visibility. It's on character relationships, and therefore the proximity of the Appeal A site to the national landscape leads me to conclude that that is also within the setting of the national landscape.
And then finally, in respect of now the Appeal A site, also in respect of the supplemental evidence that you've provided, can you just update the inspector on visibility in relation to that site in relation to that?
That's
evidence?
right. In winter, the photos which for reference were taken by Mr. Bennett from the council in the winter, the photos that appear in my supplemental proof, they demonstrate that in winter months, the Appeal A site is visible from the national landscape, and it's from public footpath Bramley 277, I believe.
Yep.
I should check my reference. Yes.
So that's Bramley 277.
Yeah.
And we'll come on, Inspector, just to touch and pick up on that in more detail on the visual section. But for now, I think that's all I want you to address in respect of that element. And before we move off this issue, Inspector, the published character issue, can I just ask you, in the Surrey LCA, we've got this additional element which we find at the back of that document called key positive landscape attributes, and you deal with that at 3.9. Can you just help the inspector with those and how, if they're significant, how are they significant in this case?
Sorry, where are we?
So we've gone back to the same page that we were looking at previously when we looked at the published character, page 16. Yeah. And at 3.9, we can see key positive landscape attributes.
That's right. So the key positive landscape attributes were identified within the published assessment as those elements that make elements of characteristics that make a meaningful contribution to the area. I've listed them here, and again, for convenience, I've emboldened those that I consider represented by the site in its landscape setting. And as you can see, sir, in my paragraph 3.9, the all except 3 of those characters are represented by the site and its landscape setting. And therefore, I've concluded in my 3.10 that the site and its setting make a meaningful contribution to the overall character of the wooded low-wheeled landscape type.
Brilliant.
Oh, clear what you're talking about in terms of the site. In terms of its setting there, are you talking about the area just up to Dunsfold Road and the field either side, or a wider area?
It's essentially the perceptual setting of the site, sir. So it's largely the areas from which the site can be perceived, which is mostly land to the north. The setting of the site to the south is essentially Lydia Park, which, you know, if you go beyond Lydia Park, you won't essentially be aware of the site there. So it's the areas from which you would be aware of the development of the site. And so in this case, because the land rises to the north, then it's more readily perceived from the elevated land.
Okay, Inspector. So if we can then move on to your landscape appraisal results, and we can see there that within section 3, you identify, as the Purple Book tells you to do at 3.38, relevant landscape receptors. And you list them there on page 22 as being the overall character, the immediate presence of Lydia Park to the south, wider open field to the north, relationship with Surrey Hills area of outstanding natural beauty, now national landscape. And you go and appraise the landscape effects in section 4. So what I would like you to do is to take the inspector through 2 of those receptors, and so he can see how the Purple Book exercise has taken place in relation to those receptors, please.
Okay, sir. So if I'd ask you to turn up paragraph 4.4 of my proof, and this is where I consider the open character, the overall character of the site as a receptor. And so you can see I begin with drawing upon my baseline assessment, and said the authorised baseline condition of the site is that of an area of open countryside comprising a wooded stream corridor, an overgrown hedgerow, and an area of rough grassland with scrubby vegetation. And then I go on to make professional judgments on the susceptibility and value. So in terms of susceptibility, I've identified that the type of change proposed would involve the fundamental alteration of the character of the site from an area of intact and characteristic countryside within an area of great landscape value to a surfaced, enclosed and occupied gypsy and traveller pitch. And therefore I've judged it to be of high susceptibility because the level of change is likely to be fundamental. Separately considering the value of this receptor to society at large, I've identified that it's washed over by the AGLV designation, which is partly due to its intrinsic character and partly due to its functional role as the setting of the national landscape, and that's given rise to a high value there. And so combining those scores, high and high means high. So I've judged the overall sensitivity of the receptor to be high. And then I've considered the submitted scheme based upon the proposed site plan, which I reproduced as figure 2 in my proof, which shows the entire area of the site being surfaced with a combination of hardcore and hard standing. I've identified the pitches proposed to be bound with a hedgerow, which would divide the site into 3 pitches and a proposed parking area to the south. The elements within: utility room of brick and tile construction, a mobile home and a touring caravan, each within the 2 southern pitches, and then within the northern, slightly larger pitch, a utility room, a double chalet bungalow, and 2 touring caravans. And I've identified these measures would necessitate the clearance of all vegetation within the site, noting the fact that the baseline condition is that it's wooded, in part, changing its character from open countryside to a residential pitch with associated activity and domestic paraphernalia. And so, taking those factors into account, sir, my judgment was that the magnitude of change would be high. And so I've, in accordance with figure 5.1, I've combined a high sensitivity with a high magnitude of change to give rise to a major adverse significance of effect.
Now, can I ask you to have a look then at the receptor relationship with the Surrey Hills area of outstanding natural beauty? And I want you to take us through that, but I want also you to have to hand the document that Mr. Cottle has provided us with, which is a officer's report in relation to WA 2021-02392, and in particular, he refers to the section within that on character, which begins, the site is effectively sandwiched between similar sites to the southwest and northeast, upon which permission has recently been granted, and continues through to visual amenity of the AGLV. So what I want you to do for the inspector is to take him through 4.23 to 4.29 and 4.30 in respect of the relationship with the Surrey Hills national landscape, and then to help him with, if it does, how this site and indeed the other sites that the inspector is considering differ from the one that Mr. Cottle is referring to.
Absolutely. So, sir, I've identified that the boundary of the national landscape lies at Dunsfold Road, which is approximately 160 metres northwest of the site boundary. And that, as we've seen on figure 5, Lydia Park is overlooked by the elevated land within the national landscape, and therefore it's clear that the site's located within its setting. With regard to the susceptibility of this particular receptor, the authorised condition of the site is currently part of an area of naturalistic open countryside, which is typical of the low weald, and that makes a positive contribution to the setting of the national landscape, both of itself as a characteristic feature, but also as the natural separation between Lydia Park and the national landscape. And as I mentioned before, the trees that were within the site contributed to that separation. So I judge the susceptibility to be high on that basis. With regard to the value of the receptor, it's a nationally valued landscape, and so the value of it is by definition high, which has given rise to a high sensitivity judgment for this receptor. And with regard to the impact, what's now paragraph 189 of the NPPF is clear, recognises the setting of national landscapes. And it says that development within the setting should be sensitively located and designed to avoid or minimise adverse impacts on the designated areas. And furthermore, the management plan for the national landscape, which is core document 9B.3, should you wish to refer to it, sir, that requires development within the national landscape setting to enhance local character and the environmental quality. So, well, in my view, sir, the proposed development will project an incongruous and intensive land use towards the national landscape that's anticipated to result in harm to the character of its setting. It would replace an area of naturalistic woodland and an overgrown hedgerow that currently assists in the separation of Lydia Park and the national landscape with a domestic land use that's not sensitively located or designed. It projects directly towards the national landscape. So if you look at, sorry? No, I'm summarising my evidence. I'm on 4.29, but I'm basically summarising. I don't need to read verbatim. This is my assessment, so I can talk around it. Yeah. And as I said, it projects directly towards the national landscape, and it's as in fact the existing gap between the Lydia Park and the national landscape is 300 metres, and this development essentially halves it, projects out, it reduces it to 160 metres. And so, as I've said, figure 5 demonstrates there's a clear visual relationship between the site and the national landscape, and and I've predicted the findings in my supplementary proof in my 4.29, saying it's likely to be greater in winter months when leaves are absent. And Mr. Bennett has demonstrated that with his photographs, which I've included within my supplemental proof. So, taking all of that into account, I've judged the magnitude of change to be high. So, again, giving rise to an adverse effect of major significance.
And then,
Mr. Dudley, in reaching these judgments, is there a matrix that you've been using?
I have realised, sir, that I didn't append it, but I can very easily produce it because it was a
It's
standard.
usually put in, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry, that's a mistake on my part that I haven't appended it, but I can produce it. It's the standard Nicholson's methodology. And so, I mean, I can absolutely, I can show you on a screen now if it would assist, sir, and show the other people in the room because it's a standard methodology that the company was using at the time, which I authored. Okay, and so yeah,
I asked
those
you,
are the two receptors, Mr. Lintott.
thank you. So I asked you in respect of the decision WA 2021-02392 and to help the inspector with where that differs, if it does, from these appeal sites. Can you just help the inspector with that?
Yes, of course. Well, fundamentally, the context of each of these sites is different from the scheme that's been circulated because the first sentence says it all. That particular site in question was effectively sandwiched between similar sites to the southwest and northeast, which already benefited from permission for gypsy and traveller pitches. And so it would comprise infill development of the existing Lydia Park site rather than an obvious encroachment into the countryside. So it's my opinion, based on my figure 3 red lines, that this is the exact opposite. Because taking the Appeal B site as an example, that projects, its alignment is perpendicular to the access road to Lydia Park. It could not possibly reduce the distance further between Lydia Park and the national landscape. There's nothing either side of it. It's located within an open field, as are each of the appeal sites, if they're considered individually. And so, whilst infill and context was a consideration for the scheme that's been circulated, I don't agree that that applies in this particular case.
In terms of the one that you've been asked to comment on, do you know exactly where this site is?
I know it's one of the sites to the south,
within
Lydia
track
Park.
that leads to the appeal sites.
Yes.
So it's right. So it's on the other side of that track from.
That's right, and it essentially projects the opposite way into. I think there's probably a drawing that can be circulated.
Yeah. Well, we've got.
I'll ask one of the appellant's witnesses. Is their document.
But essentially, it projects from the access track to Lydia Park towards Lydia Park, away from the national landscape, whereas the sites in question do the opposite. They project from the edge of Lydia Park towards the national landscape.
Just so the inspector has got that in his mind, Mr. Dudley, could I just ask you to have a look at Mr. Wood's appendix CW16A, because he shows all of those within that. Mr. Ward, sorry, is appendix CW16A, which is appended to his supplemental evidence, and we looked at that yesterday. You'll find it in the core documents under the supplemental evidence section.
I'm in 16A now.
Yeah, thank you, Inspector. I'm just waiting because you've got to scroll through a fair bit to get there, so I can see Mr. Dudley's just doing that. So just wait until he tells me, Inspector, that he's found it.
Sorry, what's the reference?
So it's the supplemental proofs, and so that is under CD10, and then you can find it in A, B, C, or D, depending which one you're looking at, and then Little Roman 1. And you want the point 3, which is supplementary evidence from planning. And then just let me know when you've got that.
Got it.
And then you need to look to internal page number 8 on the PDF, so 8 of 80. and the inspector will have it as that page 1 of 22 in the bottom right-hand
Yes.
corner.
And it's where we've got the colour-coded
Colour-coded
sites.
sites, yeah,
Yeah, and the reference numbers. Yeah.
Okay,
absolutely.
02392, which is the coloured purple site.
Yeah.
Yep. And so, well, you can see there, sir, my point that site, and I presume it's the Appeal B site, which is shown in grey on that plan as well. So you can see that they project in opposite directions from the access track to Lydia Park. The 02392 projects towards Lydia Park.
Yeah.
And the area that's coloured in grey projects towards the national landscape.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dudley. So, and again, bearing in mind that we're trying to do this quickly, so we're trying to do it with relation to just the B proof, but there are some subtle differences between the sites. What I'd like you to do next to conclude on your appraisal results is to turn back to your B proof, where you've summarised the landscape effects underneath paragraph 4.31.
Yeah.
And then if you can we can see we've got the overall character of the site, major adverse there, which you've taken us through, and we can see the relationship with Surrey Hills AONB, national landscape, major adverse, and then we've got the field and we've got the immediate presence of Lydia Park to the south. Can you just help the inspector for his note, and I don't ask you to turn it up, with where you're dealing with Appeal A, and so there may be a different conclusion in respect of any of those characteristics. Can you just help the inspector with where he'll find those in the document and what that might be? And if there's any difference between C and D, just confirm that, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so you'll find the results for my Appeal A within paragraph 4.30 of the Appeal A. 4.30 of the Appeal A proof. And the other results are in the corresponding paragraphs 4.31 of their respective proofs. In all cases, that's right, for B, C and D. So basically for all of the sites, my judgment on the overall character of the site was major, adverse. For all of the sites, my judgment on the immediate presence of Lydia Park to the south was moderate to moderate minor. And then for the last two receptors, there was some difference. And this is because Appeal A is single pitch and it sits within that vegetated context. So for the wider open field to the north, the effects on that receptor, my judgment for Appeal A was major to moderate adverse and major adverse for B, C and D. And similarly for the, sorry, I'll let you make your note. Similarly for the relationship with the national landscape, on Appeal A, it was major to moderate adverse, and then major adverse for the remaining ones.
And just remind me of the difference for those judgments.
Yes, absolutely. That was because the magnitude of effect for Appeal A was lower. It was moderate medium as opposed to high, and so high sensitivity combined with medium magnitude give rise to a major to moderate adverse effect, whereas high to high give rise to major.
And then just before we move on to topic E then of our list of topics, you've got a little section there on potential for cumulative landscape impacts. Can you just help the inspector just briefly with what the situation is in respect of those elements?
Yeah, I've considered each appeal individually as required, but I've also, recognising the fact that these are coming together, that the approval of multiple pitches would lead to a cumulative erosion of the setting of the national landscape. And this is specifically recognised as a risk within the National Landscapes Management Plan. I can take you to that should you wish, sir, or you can take my word on that. But it's what I can tell you is that within the National Landscape Management Plan, it's on page 33, second paragraph. And so I think
you also, Inspector, for your ease of reference, you also refer to that, don't you, in your in this same document, your proof at 2.15, where you quote the section from the National Landscape Plan.
that's right.
Okay. So if we then come on to look at topic E, Inspector, that's the way Mr. Woods has dealt with the landscape effects of the scheme. And I want you to just remind the Inspector of the points that, well, perhaps if I just ask you the question. So Mr. Woods has relied upon essentially several elements within his 9.2 to 9.8 in his proof of evidence. Those, Inspector, are a recent appeal decision at Goring in Oxfordshire, the presence of Lydia Park, and also the planting proposals that are put forward. So he relies upon those. And Inspector, you'll see that he discusses those from 9.2 to 9.8. And I'd just like you briefly to touch on each of those in turn, drawing on your rebuttal evidence where you address those. So for the Inspector's benefit then, the first of those points is the appeal decision at Goring in Oxfordshire, which he relies upon in terms of caravans being something that you would expect to see in the countryside or not harmful inherently in the countryside. So could you help the Inspector with that assertion and what you say about it?
Absolutely. Yeah, as Mr. Lintott pointed out, there's 6 paragraphs within the appellant's evidence, which covers matters of landscape within the setting of a national landscape. But addressing the first point, so I don't consider that approach particularly relevant because the Goring decision, which is referenced within Mr. Woods' evidence, was only commenting on the specific appearance of caravans and mobile homes and the fact that they are to be expected within gypsy and traveller sites, which are in turn to be expected within certain parts of the countryside. But what that doesn't consider is the wider effects on the landscape of the fundamental land use change. And specifically in this location, because we can't just look at these elements in isolation, we have to look at the context, we have to look at this, we have to establish the robust baseline and then consider what the relevant receptors are, and then to undertake, as the guidance advises, a clear and transparent assessment of the effects on those receptors. So, and in coming to that, I've relied on the recent decision from Inspector Pleasant on the Peasdale Hill scheme, which is core document, if we turn up 11A.1.
So we can do that, or Inspector, you have a summary of that at the rebuttal proof at 2.12 of the rebuttal evidence. So you can find it in either place, whichever is easiest for you to do so.
So would you rather run from my rebuttal for the sake of speed? Perfect. Okay, well, in that case, turn up, yes, it's page 7 of my rebuttal, paragraph 2.12. And so you can see there in paragraph 32 of her decision, Inspector Pleasant recognises that caravan sites are a form of development that often appears in the countryside, and that in the PPTS it makes it clear that those sites can be acceptable in the countryside. And in a particular case, reference to the suggestion by Green Planning Studio, again, this is an appeal I was involved in, sir, that all landscapes have man-made elements and the landscape will evolve over time. However, in that particular case, she said the scale and form of the development proposed in this location would appear isolated and incongruous. And so when we consider isolated, I'd ask you to bear in mind the positions of appeal sites C and D in particular, and would have a significant adverse impact on the character of the landscape. And this last sentence again is particularly pertinent. Harm to the fabric of the landscape cannot be mitigated through planting. So you cannot mitigate harm to the fabric of the landscape by hiding the problem.
So what she's explaining there is the importance of looking at the character of the receiving landscape that the inspector is deciding. Now, you have taken him through in some detail as part of the issues we've already looked at, what the character of this landscape is. One thing that you haven't referred to in that summary was the overall strategy for the landscape type, which one sees on your page 18 of 36, paragraph 3.16 for Appeal B. Can you, summarising what you've already said about the receiving landscape and with help from the overall strategy, help the inspector with what the situation is in terms of the impact of caravans on this particular landscape and the impact that he's assessing in respect of Appeals A to D in this case?
Yeah, well, sir, I've taken you through my judgments, which have concluded that this is a highly sensitive location, that it's within the setting of a nationally important landscape, and that each of the schemes individually would give rise to significant landscape harm. And as in my paragraph 3.16, I've cited the overall strategy for the landscape type that the sites are located within, and it includes the requirement to limiting the spread of settlements and other development. And so it's important to consider the specific context in which development proposals are coming forward.
Okay, so, and secondly, Mr. Woods relies upon, in his 9.6, the presence of Lydia Park. And I would just ask you as a second issue under this issue E, as I identified, just to help the inspector with whether or not Lydia, well, how the way Mr. Woods has addressed Lydia Park differs from how the inspector has seen you've addressed it in your assessment, and why that matters, what the correct way of assessing Lydia Park is, you say, in respect of your assessment.
Yeah, so the presence of Lydia Park has been advanced as a justification for the creation of more Lydia Park, essentially. But in my view, this is incorrect. And this is incorrect because of the decision of Inspector Willows that I took you to earlier for Burnt Hill, where he identified that a valued landscape and an area of great landscape value remains a valued landscape, an area of great landscape value, irrespective of what sits next to it. The context there doesn't dilute the designation, and therefore the policy obligation to protect and enhance that landscape remains. And so it's my view, sir, that my approach is correct, which is to consider an appropriate range of receptors based upon a rigorous baseline assessment, and to undertake clear and transparent judgments on those. And what I've identified, sir, is that the context is different between Lydia Park and these sites, that these sites they perform a strategic role in separating Lydia Park from the national landscape.
And then perhaps before we move on to the next issue, Mr. Woods in his 9.8 relies upon, for Appeals A and B, a scheme which Petrov Harley has drawn up, and also a planting scheme that one finds in the documentation for Appeal site B. So can you just help us with that element and what you say about in respect of each of those well, we'll come and deal with C and D separately because they're dealt with by Mr. Rowe, but in respect of each of A and B, what you say about the ability to rely upon landscaping elements to start off with to mitigate landscape character harm, bearing in mind what you've already told us about that and the fabric of the landscape in the decisions we've looked at, and then any visual elements.
Before you do that, I wonder, sir, if this is a convenient moment. We're obviously not going to be finishing for a long time yet. To have some lunch.
We're not far away.
We're not, well,
Are we?
we're nearly there, Chief, yeah. Yeah, so it's visuals. So I think, to be fair to Mr. Masters, that we're nearly there, Inspector, but I'm not sure whether we're going to get there in the next 5 minutes, which would be within our time estimate. I think I will save a little bit of time, but I think it probably will take about 20 minutes.
To press on, but just get it finished.
Yeah.
I'm quite happy with it. You know, talking about another half an hour.
Well, I've said about 20 minutes, which would mean we're saving a little bit of time, but we're a little bit later than you said. Yeah, I think so. I mean, don't hold me rigidly to that, Inspector, but I think we will get done by 1:30. So if you would just indulge me for a little bit longer, I mean, it would still be slightly below my time estimate. So, and we'll try and I've tried to rattle through as much as I can. So yeah, just on that last point, Inspector, I was asking him in respect of A and B to deal with landscaping proposals. Can you just address that point, please?
Yeah, absolutely. We've already covered the fact that you know, planting around things isn't sufficient to mitigate landscape effects. But also, as I've set out in my evidence, the intentional and authorised development has had a hugely detrimental effect on the ground conditions of the sites through the combination of soil compaction, soil contamination, and waterlogging, the effects on the water table. And a good sort of indicator of that is if you turn up my Appeal A proof and turn to figure 7 on page 22.
Just bear with us while we do that.
Figure 7. And so what you can see here, sir, is part of what was the retained wooded stream corridor. In the background of the view, you can see Appeal A site. This was taken from Appeal B site. And you can see what's happened to the trees located between those two sites. They've all died. Which has, again, had a further detrimental effect on the ability of, you know, outside of the sites themselves on the wooded stream corridor to perform that important strategic function that it does. You can also see the vegetation there is very sort of typical wetland vegetation as well, which because of the interference with the ground, with the water levels. And so, sir, it's my professional opinion that any scheme advanced on the sites would be highly unlikely to establish because of this hugely detrimental effect on the ground conditions.
And then while we're there, I just turn back in that proof to page 21. I can see that you've got another figure there, figure 5. Again, could you, insofar as relevant, could you help the inspector with what one sees there?
Yeah, that's one of the two trees that was retained within Appeal Site A, and I mean you can see there, sir. There's a tipper and a trailer with a mini digger parked within the root protection area of that tree. You can see that it's been surfaced around the tree, and you can see the fact that that tree is again pretty much dead.
Okay. So then could we move on to what I've called issue F, which is Mr. Rowe's points. And again, just in the interests of time, if I just summarise what those points are, those are two factors principally. Mr. Rowe says, well, there's already been a permission granted for a light industrial scheme at Thatched House Farm, and he quotes extensively from that. And he then also relies upon the imposition of a landscaping scheme. So we've already dealt with the landscaping scheme in one respect, but can I ask you to deal with those two points really, and perhaps if you do it, just summarising the way you've done it in your rebuttal evidence.
Absolutely. Well, so you'll find my discussion of those matters in paragraphs 3.6 to 3.9 of my rebuttal proof. So that's across pages 9 and 10 of my rebuttal proof. And so, in my view, it's wrong to compare the two because they're fundamentally different land uses. Comparing a light industrial scheme with residential gypsy and traveller pitches is not a valid comparison. Their character and appearance is fundamentally different. And in my paragraph 7 of 3.7 of my rebuttal proof, as I quote, the council's officer rightly identified that the structures within the light industrial scheme wouldn't appear materially different to agricultural buildings. And we've known from my appraisal of the key characteristics of this landscape that agriculture gives rise to the character of this landscape, and that agricultural buildings are something, therefore, that would be expected. And so I support the officer's decision there that it was, in that particular case, it was correct to grant consent, and that it's not comparable with the schemes before you today, sir.
And what about the location of the appeal schemes A to D in comparison with where that light industrial permission was in relation to any surrounding development? Is that something that's relevant also?
Yeah, the light industrial units which were granted permission occurred in context with similar buildings, and they were essentially in the same parcel of land. Whereas in this particular case, the sites are separate. They're north of the access track to Lydia Park. And in the cases of appeals C and D, the correct baseline condition is they're located in the middle of a field, 80 to 100 metres away from Lydia Park, with a wooded stream corridor in the intervening ground that's punched through for access.
Okay. And then is there anything else that you need to say in respect of what Mr. Rowe says about any landscaping possibilities in respect of the sites that he's looking at, in particular C and D? I know we've looked at it for A and B.
That's right. I think the issue there also is that were you to permit a planting scheme on the outside of those sites by condition, what it would do is create artificial small geometric enclosures within the open field in close proximity to the national landscape. And so it would be contrary to the grain of the landscape in that location.
All right. And then as we move past 1.5 hours, we've got just 10 minutes or so to deal with the visual environment, which is my issue 3, Inspector, as I outlined at the outset. In particular, we've got a list of receptors. Now, what I want you to do is please to, again, as with the landscape matters, help the inspector with what the appellants have done in respect to appeals A and B and C and D in respect of the visual environment. And then, given that we don't have any agreement on any, as we stand, statement of common ground in respect of viewpoints, I want you to just briefly, in respect of each one of the 4 viewpoints that you describe, take the inspector to those viewpoints and explain how you've assessed the sensitivity and magnitude of impact for each of those.
Absolutely. Well, sir, you'll see from my evidence, I took you earlier to figure 6.1 of the Purple Book, and you'll see in my evidence that that's the process that I followed to assess the effects on visual receptors. There is no assessment of visual receptors or identification of visual receptors within the appellant's evidence that I found. I believe there's one Google Street View image in Mr. Rowe's evidence, but that's all I could find. And certainly no recognition of the visibility from public rights of way. So what I identified, sir, by an extensive walk of the setting of the site was I undertook my review in the summer. and identified that the sites were visible from public footpaths, Hascombe 279, Bramley 277, and also from Dunsfold Road. This is within section 5 of my proofs for B, C, and D. With respect to the PLA site, I couldn't see that in the summer, and so I didn't consider visual effects of that scheme. And so I'll whiz you through to the conclusions because you can follow, as you know, I follow clear and transparent processes required, so you can follow my process, sir. But in conclusion, the effect on the users of public footpath, Hascombe 279. So that's the one that runs along the hillside to the south of the woods, above Park Hatch.
So we're looking at if we look at Appeal B, we're at page 28, and we're looking at the text below figure 7, aren't we?
That's correct.
Yeah, okay.
Yes. So it's the northernmost circle on that plan. So I've indicated on there in red circles where images were taken. So it's the northernmost one, just to the west of Coney Burrows. So I determined a major to moderate adverse effect on the users, because even though it's quite a distant view from up there, it's a view from a national landscape looking out into the low weald. With respect to the users of public footpath, Bramley 277. So that's the public right of way. If you look at the plan, it goes from Painshill Farm Stables up to Nor, and so the view I considered was just where it says Painshill Farm Stables. You see the circle there, and now from that view, Lydia Park is currently hidden by topography and vegetation. So the only Gypsy and Traveller elements that you see from that view are the appeal schemes. And so on that receptor, I determined a major adverse effect. And then the users of Dunsfold Road, I considered firstly from where you can see the bend in the road, near to Painshill Farm Stables, and also you get a view now through the entrance to the industrial scheme, which we discussed earlier, which is the southernmost circle. And for those, I determined an effect of major to moderate adverse significance. And then following that, we now have the benefit of winter views taken kindly by Mr. Bennett, and the two key elements that revealed to me was, firstly, that in the winter, Appeal A scheme is visible from the national landscape, from public footpath Bramley 277, which I judged in my supplemental proof to give rise to an adverse effect of major to moderate significance on that receptor.
And so just so the inspector can see which one of the circles that is, have I got that right? That's the circle next to Painshill Farm Stables.
Correct.
Then? Okay.
And then the second key point that the winter view is revealed is that in the winter, there is a view towards the sites from public footpath. I think it's 511. Sorry, bear with me while I find the electronic copy of my document.
So we're in your supplementary proof of evidence.
Supplementary evidence, that's it. And it is paragraph 22 onwards, and it's 533, sorry, sir, which is the public footpath. If you go northwest of the northernmost circle on my plan, you'll see that there's a public footpath that follows the contours on the edge of Hascombe Hill. Now, Mr. Bennett will need to confirm the exact location of the image there. I'm sure he can draw that on at some point today. But the image that's presented below paragraph 23 of my supplemental proof was taken by Mr. Bennett. And so what that revealed, that the appeal sites are indeed visible from public footpath Hascombe 533 in winter, again giving rise to an adverse effect of major to moderate significance. And as I've previously stated, sir, the ground conditions on these sites have been damaged to the extent that I don't consider that any screening vegetation could be successfully established within those sites to mitigate views.
But even if it could, what you said about in relation to Mr. Rowe's evidence, this point about geometric shapes, would that be equally applicable if one's
Yes,
looking
it
at
would.
this?
Yeah, that's right. So appeal B would be a geometric rectangle extending directly towards the natural landscape, and C and D would be isolated squares of small squares of vegetation within a field.
But that point doesn't apply to A.
Correct, because A is in a vegetated context. A is not visible from 533. It's only B, C, and D.
Okay, Inspector. Well, thank you very much.
Sorry, I
for
just want to
Yeah.
clarify that last comment. You said A is not visible from.
A is not visible from public footpath 533, which is the one that runs through the woods.
Right.
In the winter, A is visible from 277, which is the footpath that runs up the hill from Paynes Hill Farm to north.
Sorry, can I just, I understood your evidence, but in the summer, A is not visible. And the only place it's visible in the winter is from that footpath you just mentioned. Is that right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what's.
I know, sir, it's just the way that Mr. Dudley answered it.
Yeah,
like
I just wasn't
specifically
clear, but
by.
I've got there now.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Masters, that's it.
So thank you very much, Inspector.
Yeah.
So we got there just under time. So hopefully that enables us to have a lunch break for an hour if we could manage it.
Well, let's see where we are on timing. Because.
So I was going to mention that. I wonder whether or not we should stop the flooding expert from coming. He's clearly, unless he's already here, he's clearly not going to be needed today.
Well, what I haven't got yet from the appellants is time estimates for cross-examination, despite asking for them. But I only had them for evidence in chief.
Well, I thought I'd supply those, but mine would be about an hour and a half, but it may be longer, just a little bit. It's approximate.
Well, I'm going to be
Right, well, we certainly won't need Mr. Smythe today, if he's depending on what.
Well, unfortunately for Mr. Smythe, after what we said, I mean, he understands the way things operate, and I think you were quite right, Inspector. We don't want to waste time, so I did ask him to come. I think I won't be able to stop him now, but oh, there we go. Well, so Mr. Masters has already spotted him sitting in the corner there. So, but he's here. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So he's here, but he won't be needed this afternoon, I'm sure. But it looks from those estimates that if we came back at 2:30, we ought to be finished by around about the 5 mark. I mean, you may want to try and foreshorten lunch a little bit.
Well, I think I'm going to suggest that. And the other point I want to make is that both advocates have given similar estimates in terms of timing, about an hour and a half. Bear in mind that you're both representing. Yeah, Mr. Wood's representing both your cases. I don't want duplication.
No, I'm conscious, sir, that mine might. I don't know what.
Well, I'm going to go with Mr. Cottle first.
Absolutely, that's why we've done it
from that end of the room.
Yeah, well, no, that's why we've done it.
Mr. Cottle's covered points that are relevant to Mr. Wood. I don't want you going back over them.
I'm not going to, sir. So mine might be shorter. It may not be shorter. We've already arranged this. Mr. Cottle was going to go first on this, so that he would cover, so that I wouldn't cover points that he's covered.
Yeah, because that. Right. Well, in that case, I would expect yours your cross-examination to be shorter.
Well, I'm not going to guarantee anything at the moment,
No,
because
no,
I don't know what.
And obviously you're going to tell me it will depend on the answers you get.
It depends on lots of things, but yes.
Of course it will, yeah.
It will do.
Yeah. But I would nevertheless expect it at the outset to be shorter. And I want to try and achieve complete landscape if we can.
I understand, sir. I know where you want to get to, sir, and I will try my best.
Because there are going to be grave problems if we can't complete within
No,
2 weeks.
I understand, sir, I do, and I will very much try my best, but obviously until I hear what's being said, it's difficult.
Right, it's 1:30. I am going to suggest a shorter lunch break if the parties can accommodate that.
I think we need at least about 45, 50 minutes.
45 minutes?
I think 45 would do it. I mean, before we go, I was hoping we might make some progress, because in your little timetable, we've obviously got some other landscape evidence to be heard as well, obviously from the appellate's witnesses, and you had hoped that we would have that dealt with today also. We'll see how we get on, but
yes,
I like you, thought slightly less cross-examination may be coming, and that we may be getting on to the appellant's witnesses this afternoon. So I'd certainly want to try and do that if we can, just because obviously otherwise it has knock-on effects.
Well, one thing I have asked the council are for the opening hours of this building, and they do extend beyond 5 o'clock. I think there's an evening meeting tonight, but we again, depending on other commitments that the parties have, I'm prepared to sit beyond 5 o'clock if it helps us.
All right.
Get to a convenient point. So bear that in mind. But anyway, I'm adjourning now, and we'll come back at 2:15.